0-2 for Pages. High towering fly ball toward left and going back up against the enemy. That's going to carry out. Pedro Pages with a wind-blown homer for the Cardinals. It's 2-0 St. Louis. Fly ball hit toward left. Donovan racing toward the line. He's got it. What a way to end Father's Day Sunday. The St. Louis Cardinals take 2 out of 3 at Wrigley Field.
Chip Carey on the call for Bally Sports Midwest alongside Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis. I'm Alex Ferrario, a Monday edition of BK and Ferrario. No BK, as you heard him earlier today on the opening drive. He will be back with us tomorrow and then a full week next week as BK filling in for Brooke these last few Mondays. Cardinals win the series against the Cubs over the weekend. A Father's Day victory for this Cardinals team after falling in Saturday's game, and they do T-bone again what they have done since Mother's Day. And BK, you heard this stat earlier today on the opening drive. This is a different team. And as much as I push back with this Cardinals squad of, I don't think they can do anything in the playoffs, I can't buy into this team, they're good enough to get into the playoffs because the National League stinks, I believe all of those statements to still be true. But I also can't deny what they have done over the last 30 games. So since Mother's Day, 20-11, they have won or split 8 out of their 10 series. The only series that they have lost was the Philadelphia Phillies one and the Houston Astros one. Those are the 2 series that they lost in that stretch of games. Their starting pitching has the 8th best ERA. Their relief pitching has the 9th best ERA. By the way, strikeout percentage 21st for that relief pitching. And their offense has the 4th best batting average, 12th best on-base percentage, 8th best slug percentage, and 11th best OPS. Now, was it the way you want to win the games against the Chicago Cubs? Now, if you had Pedro Pages hitting home runs in 2 of those 3 games, then yes, I'd say congrats to you and go get your lottery tickets. But pitching got the job done. They stayed within striking distance of their opponent in 2 of the 3 games. And they found a way to close down them and pull out victories. And right now, again, I still believe this team doesn't have anything to get through a playoff series. I think this team will make the playoffs because of the National League. I have to give them credit for what they are doing right now. And that's picking up victories against inferior opponents and making themselves distance from the pack. They did it with the Chicago Cubs. They did it with the Pittsburgh Pirates. So I will give credit to a Cardinals team that is doing something I didn't think they were capable of, and that's playing consistently.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think they can do much in the playoffs. They need some upgrades, and that's what the trade deadline is for. Trying to upgrade to get yourself through October. But I'm kind of with you, man. The way they're playing right now, it's consistent baseball. There's not really a hole that you can look at and say, boy, that feels like it is a dam that's about to break. I mean, looking at their numbers since Mother's Day in that 31-game stretch where you mentioned they're 20-11, starting rotation, ERA, whip, and batting average against, top 10 across Major League Baseball. Their relief pitching's been really good, as we know. The offense as a whole, their slash line is top 15 across baseball. Their OPS is 11th at 728. And that's with Paul Goldschmidt kind of regressing back this month. So they are playing consistent baseball. They look like a winning team. And they're doing what you mentioned, which is most important. They're in the midst of a stretch where it is, I think it's 8 of 10 series are against wild card teams in the National League, including the Atlanta Braves, who we'll see later in just a couple of weeks here. They're winning them. They beat the Pittsburgh Pirates. They took 2 of 3 from them. They took 2 of 3 from the Chicago Cubs in Wrigley, which is a very tough place to play. These are important wins. These are significant wins to help try and separate yourself and climb above that 500 mark. And the way that they're doing it is it's complete baseball. And I think that's the most impressive part of it. You know, when they were winning early on, like prior to Mother's Day when they were 15-24, so also known as not winning much, they weren't winning because of their offense. You know, it was like 2-1 wins, maybe a 1-0 win. The other team would gift them a win, like that Angels series. They're now winning baseball games because of what they are doing. And I think that is the most important part of this stretch. And it's why I'm starting to buy in a little bit. I'm with you. I don't think they can make much noise in the playoffs. but I certainly think they look like a playoff team right now, and look like a team that can start to separate themselves from this muddy middle in the National League.
Yeah, you've distanced yourself now 2 games against the Chicago Cubs after this weekend. You've distanced yourself 1.5 games in terms of your wild card positioning. You're second in the National League wild card right now, a half game up on the Padres. You've separated yourselves from the Pirates. You've separated yourselves from the Cincinnati Reds. All of these teams you just went up against within the last 3 weeks or so, and you've beat them. The only ones, like I mentioned off the top, the Phillies and the Astros were the teams that beat you. Phillies, of course, one of the best teams in baseball ball. Astros are starting to play a little bit better right now. What you needed to do was you needed to beat up on the bad opponents. And the Cardinals in the first portion of the season were not doing that. We talk about the Chicago White Sox loss. You know, you lose the series against the Arizona Diamondbacks. You get beat by the Milwaukee Brewers. You lose to the New York Mets. It's a different team. And although I believe it's in the same stratosphere of you're a team that could get to a playoff spot and that's about it, you give them credit for what they've done. And I'll tell you the part that was impressive for me against the Chicago Cubs over the weekend was that Sunday game. Because Sunday felt like a real difference maker in the National League, at least Central race. Now, I don't think either of these teams are going to catch the Milwaukee Brewers, but you know, you're coming off of a victory with Imanaga on the mound. You had Palante. You're going to Michaelis, and Michaelis, it feels like, is in a hot streak right now, and it's hard to take that person down. Cardinals scored early, which 3 weeks ago when you and I did this show, it was one of my knocks of this team that when they play opponents, they can't get ahead early. They're giving up leads early. They didn't do that on Sunday. They get the run. They hold on to that, and the pitching locks it down. And we'll get into this a little bit deeper on in the show. But it's hard for me to deny with Miles Michaelis the way that he's been pitching, with Cal Gibson the way that he's been pitching, and then your bullpen, every single one of those games against the Chicago Cubs, with the exception of the Saturday game, but even that one felt like where you were taking Palante out, you gave yourself an opportunity with who was coming in, and it just didn't work your way in. You're keeping it within striking distance. And for me, the first month and a half of the season for the Cardinals, you weren't keeping it close. You were getting shellacked early, and then you were trying to play comeback baseball, and we all know where that offense fell. So you're sitting at Flag Day, or now you're post-Flag Day a few games, and you're sitting, like we mentioned, a half game up in the second wildcard spot and exactly a 500 team. You are a 500 team. No better, no worse than an average team. But everybody else behind you just witnessed. Pittsburgh, Chicago, Cincinnati. You'll get a taste of San Francisco real soon. You've seen Arizona. They're all bad teams. They're all less than average in the National League, which is why I give this Cardinals team the advantage.
Yeah, and I think the reason that this Cardinals team is a 500 team, or will be a 500 team, and like I look at them as like an 82 to 85 win team, which no coincidence how I looked at them going into the season, is the lack of production from Goldy Arenado still. I'm still questioning if you can reach a higher ceiling if those guys don't hit. And I think my answer is no, you cannot. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the show today. But to your point on the pitching staff, it's doing its job of not only just posting every day, you're starting to see them eat innings where Kyle Gibson and Miles Michaelis are starting to just continue to churn through quality start after quality start, which sets up the bullpen well for the next day. And then you can bring in the bullpen and you can lock down a game. Like, their pitching staff buys the offense time to get going. Now it's just a matter of will the offense kind of lift and separate and allow the Cardinals to really take off. That's the one question that still remains of if this Cardinals team is going to be better than what they are so far, which has been a up and down 500 team. But I look at all these other teams across the National League, and we've seen two of them in the last two series. Pittsburgh Pirates, that offense is really bad. Yeah. They don't really worry me unless they can find significant improvements. They've got great pitching. They've got a good bullpen and a great starting staff. And you look at the Chicago Cubs, it's the same conversation. Now, granted, their bullpen sucks, but they have kind of the same offensive issues to where they don't have anybody really producing. So I look at them and I say, okay, you clearly separate yourself from those two teams. Now it's a question of, okay, how do you match up with San Diego? Well, they've taken 2 or 3 from the San Diego Padres. Arizona, they did lose that series against them, but I think these two teams are a little closer than you give them credit for. Washington, I still don't buy. San Francisco, I don't buy. Okay, boom, I can look at the NL standings and go, the Cardinals are a playoff team as long as they can stick around 500. And I think the only way that you really see yourself fall out of that is if you go through a big losing stretch, and with the way the pitching is pitching, You're not going to have that. This team is not susceptible to long losing streaks.
And if you go through a long losing streak in this next stretch, then this is where I think everybody goes right back to where they were originally, saying there's not much you can do with this. This is your opportunity to pounce. You have to keep the pedal pushed in this next 6-series stretch, because now you're at 500 and it's kind of a level you've been toying with for the last couple of weeks. You're at 500. You've beaten 2 teams below you consecutively in the NL Central. Now is where you distance yourself, because you've got the Marlins that starts tonight. Then you're back home for an elongated stretch where you take on the Giants below you in the standings, Braves above you in the standings, but the Braves are only 3.5 games above you in the standings. And let me tell you, that team is starting to fall apart pretty quickly. And then beyond that, it's the Cincinnati Reds, the Washington Nationals, the Pittsburgh Pirates. And then you've got Kansas City and the Cubs in that stretch. All the way up until this All-Star break, you have the opportunity to push back everybody. And all you need to do is continuing what you're putting the product out right now, picking up these series wins. You're not going up against any dangerous pitching matchups. I don't know how it's lined up with the San Francisco Giants. That's probably the most dangerous pitching you're going up against. You've got the Atlanta Braves. You've got the Cincinnati Reds. We've already seen most of that pitching, the Pirates and the Washington Nationals. This is the opportunity to where the part that we doubt with this team, the offense, to put their name up there and say, yep, they've figured it out too, because that's talking about almost a 3-month stretch or a 2-month stretch going back to Mother's Day once you get to that All-Star break. And if your offense breaks through and beats up on those lesser teams for that long of a stretch and push teams back, it's no more of they could get to the playoffs and I don't know what. It turns into, how do you add to this team and make it more dangerous?
Yeah, and that's a question we got from the 636. Do you guys think if they pick up a legitimate number 2 star, they have a chance to make a deep run into the playoffs? It helps their chances, but for me, it just comes down to Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado. You know, what do those guys look like when you get to October? Because so far, Arenado's swinging a better bat. He's hitting for average, but man, he's still not hitting for any power. Paul Goldschmidt's back to really struggling. His on base, I think, is below 300 on the season. And look, now a lot of his numbers are being dragged down from his awful start to the season, but that's the thing that seems to be potentially holding them back for a playoff run. If those guys don't hit, you've got the complementary pieces as we've seen, and you've got a good enough pitching staff that if you upgrade with the number 2 and a really good bullpen, that you can be an 85 to 88 win team potentially, which that's a playoff team. But it just comes down to, for me, okay, do you get those middle of the order bats hitting? And if you don't, I don't know what you're going to look like. Now, we'll see. Now, when they get Contreras and Newbar back, we'll have a better idea of if they can survive, if this is what Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado are. But that is the biggest question for the Cardinals in my mind. They've got the pitching to help them sustain 500. It's a matter if the offense can take them to the next level. Yeah,
well, and that's why I heard BK mention it earlier today in the opening drive. You have to invest in this team. And as much as I pushed back on that about a month ago, you got to invest into it, because Army says it all the time. The team will show me what I need to do at the trade deadline. They've shown the Cardinals what to do. Now it's a matter of, are you going to be aggressive, or are you going to be passive and sit back with just some type of number 5 starter to add in? Frankly, I think for this team, you have an opportunity to be really aggressive and make it better than what anybody's expecting it to be. And that was another text we got on our Air Comfort Service text line. It says, I don't really know how to feel about this team. I can't take them seriously, because as much as you guys talk about how the National League is not great, that doesn't make me feel any better about this team. We'll ask Jesse Rogers of ESPN about that coming up at 11:30. Katie Wu will join us at 12 o'clock. So plenty more of your Cardinals questions we'll get throughout the day here on BK and Ferrario. We're live up on our YouTube channel at 101 ESPN STL. Coming up next, I mentioned Pages at the beginning of the show, and it was a little tongue-in-cheek, but Pedro Pages had himself one hell of a weekend in Wrigley Field. Does that mean he's Wally pipped Ivan Herrera? We'll discuss that next here on 101 ESPN. Alex Ferrario with you to talk about my friend and insurance agent, Tracy Bibb, her and her team at Allstate, making sure that you are taken care of with your insurance coverage for your home, for your car. All of those things are so important that if you don't have the right insurance agent, when something goes wrong, you're left upstream without a paddle. And that's why Tracy Bibb is so important, because she's on top of it. She's always making sure that she's taking care of you, checking in, making sure you know where you're saving money, making sure where you know the competitive rates are, and when something happens, and that's the key there, because it's never a matter of if something happens, it's when. When it happens to your car, when it happens to your home, Tracy is there for you. So give her a call today. Tell her you heard me talk about it on 101 ESPN, Alex Ferrario, and she'll walk you through a free non-committal quote. Super simple. Tracy will do the whole process for you. She'll even cancel your insurance agent that you were previously with. 314-328-4260. That's 314-328-4260. It's no fib. You're always in great hands with the Bibb.
He is funky. Swing and a drive. Hit high in the air toward left. Hep is back at the ivy. And it's gone. It's gone. Pages has hit a homer. It's 1-0 Cardinals.
BT calling him funky, and then he just takes it deep at Wrigley Field. He probably was calling the pitcher funky there, right?
Yeah, Wasenski or whatever his name is. That guy's got good stuff.
Well,
Pedro,
not against
Pages.
Pedro.
No, sir.
Pedro used that win to his advantage at Wrigley Field over the weekend. He hit the home run that you heard there, Chip Carey and BT on the call. Over the weekend for Pedro Pages, he has himself a 2-hit performance, but he picks up 3 big RBIs, one in the victory on Sunday. That was the on Friday. That was the go-ahead run. And then, of course, on Sunday, coming through late for the Cardinals as well. Pedro Pages, to me, implemented a roster spot for him over the weekend against the Chicago Cubs once you get back to full health. And I know that might sound strange because you're carrying 3 catchers, because for people that didn't catch it, Wilson Contreras is slated to start a rehab assignment on Tuesday, and that will more than likely a couple of starts down in Memphis for him, and then that will get him probably to joining the team by the middle to the end of this month. We'll see probably on that homestand once the Cardinals return after taking on the Miami Marlins. But look, for Pedro Pages in the month of June, the batting average isn't overwhelming, but you're having critical at-bats for him. And why I think he's implemented himself a roster spot on the team is because of his overall performance, but also the defensive side of it and catching. When you look at Ivan Herrera and what he provides offense. We've seen the errors that pop up for Ivan Herrera in this month of June specifically, and I think it was those 2 starts against the Pirates, if I'm not mistaken. No, it was against the Rockies. Ivan Herrera is the guy that has been getting a lot more DH work, while Pages gets the catching work. And when Contreras comes back, you know exactly what it's going to be. He's going to be starting. He's going to get a couple of days off at the DH. And then how do you deploy everyone else? I really think the way at least it seemed in that Chicago Cubs series, Ollie's starting to look at this as a little of Pedro Pages has made himself the backup catcher, with Ivan Herrera being that third piece, but that impact bat when we need him to be.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. I think his role moving forward, Pages, I think he's the starting catcher until Wilson Contreras comes back. And it's not because of his bat. He had the 2 home runs over the weekend, but he's still hitting 132 with an average and a 555 OPS. Pages isn't known for his bat. It's the defense that he's providing and the way he can limit the running game. And that's the problem for Herrera. Everybody is just running wild when Ivan Herrera is behind the plate because he just doesn't have the pop time or the arm to get the ball down there to second base to make you worry about it. You know, that's what makes Contreras so good. As he's improved defensively, he's improved his framework, his blocking ability, and he had the can of the arm to throw guys out. Well, Herrera is good with blocking. I think he's fine in terms of framing, but when you look at the running game, you can steal a base on him easily. And some of that is on the pitchers, but for the most part, it feels like it's Ivan Herrera because he's the one guy we've seen get picked on by the opposing team. So when you get late into a game, you have to pull him out. They did this in the Colorado series where they took him out of the Pittsburgh series, They took him out of the game and they put in Ivan Herrera out of the game and put Pages behind the plate.
Yeah.
When it's a close game, you can't have Herrera behind the plate because a runner can get into scoring position and manufacture slug, which BK loves to talk about all the time, getting from first base and then stealing second. Yeah. So I think he is the backup catcher when Contreras comes back, to your point there, because I don't know if they view Herrera as fixable this season. And what I mean by that is just fixable defensively. I think you still like his bat. He can still be a guy that can be in the lineup against left-handed pitching, that can get a DH start, and you carry the third catcher so Pages can be a guy that can come off the bench if needed. And in the case of, maybe Herrera's not in the starting lineup, but he can pinch hit late in the game. Yeah. He can be that right-handed bat, and you still have a backup catcher on the bench. I'm going to be fascinated to see what they do when Contreras comes back. I think they're going to carry 3 catchers, and typically I'm not a fan of that. But if I'm being honest, they're probably going to approach Herrera as a non-positionalist player for a big chunk of the rest of the season until they can really work with his arm strength in the offseason behind the plate.
Well, with the stolen bases that you were talking about, both catchers have started 8 games behind the plate so far in the month of June. Pages has had 7 bases stolen against him. Ivan Herrera has had 13. So that really tells you the difference in terms of what T-Bone's talking about with those stolen bases. And that's where I feel like, I was listening to Claib's talk last week when he was on with the opening drive, and he was talking about, what the team needs and how they can fix those voids. And he talked about, of course, the number 2 starter. That's the most dire need right now for this team. But he also referenced, finding more offense from your bench. This is an internal upgrade there for you if you decide to keep him. I'll give you my thoughts on that on the other side in just a moment. But if Herrera's here, and let's just go down the path of full strength, Herrera's not even a DH for you. Herrera's coming off of the bench in terms of situations if you need to. Now, against left-handed hitters, that's where you're probably putting him in as the DH because Burleson's not going to be in there.
Contreras as catcher, and then you have Herrera DH. That's probably your best path against lefties moving forward.
But on the bench later in games, now you're talking about Herrera being a piece that you can use because if Pages is your backup catcher, now you're not worried about losing your second catcher in certain circumstances. So that really is a strength for this team if everything goes the direction, because that's the biggest if, keeping people healthy and making sure that you are that way for the rest of the season.
Yeah, you basically upgrade. When Contreras returns, my assumption is the roster move will probably be Fermin goes down when Contreras comes up. So now you've replaced your best right-handed bat off the bench as Jose Fermin or Dylan Carlson as the guys that you have to weigh the options for to Ivan Herrera, who's not hitting for a ton of power, which is a little surprising, but he does give you a competitive at-bat. It's better than saying, okay, I guess if we, last week when it was, okay, who do you pinch hit for Ciani? Do you turn to a Jose Fermin or Dylan Carlson or Brandon Crawford? Okay, well, none of those options are very good. All of a sudden, I've got a bat, to your point there, that really upgrades the bench internally. They're still going to have to find a right-handed bat at the deadline, in my opinion, but you now have upgraded the bench with Ivan Herrera being there, and you've upgraded your backup catcher defensively in Pedro Pages.
Now, we've already seen like 3 or 4 texts come in on this one, and this is what I brought up to you in the office with Ivan Herrera. Does he become one of your biggest trade chips by this year's trade deadline? Because you said that it's probably something you can't fix this season, and I think that was the biggest quote that you used in your statement, T-Bone. It's something you can't fix this season. Obviously, there's plenty of things that you can do in the offseason with Ivan Herrera if you're not happy with certain elements of his game. But once you approach this trade deadline, teams are going to be calling for some of your best players. And if you want to get that number 2 starter, as much as we can bring up certain guys like Thomas JC or Preto who's having success, or I know Jim Bowden's piece, it was Cooper Jerpy and Gordon Graceffo to go get a starting pitcher. If Pages is your backup catcher and Wilson Contreras is performing well, and as Mo tells us, there's so much depth at catcher in our minor league system, is Ivan Herrera one of your trade chips that you can acquire that bigger talent than what you originally expected?
I wouldn't make him a trade chip, but I understand the argument for doing it because he does have the prospect pedigree that there have been with Cardinals catchers in the past, and the fact of the matter that he can play could potentially be a guy that teams would value as a offensive-minded catcher. The reason I don't move on from him, though, is because I just don't know if Pedro Pages is ever going to really be at best a league average hitter. You know, when I look at Pages' bat, it is way behind. His defense is major league ready, and that's why they added him to the 40-man roster. Was one, he could be claimed in the Rule 5 draft, and his defense was major league ready. Mm-hmm. His bat is way behind, and I don't know if it will catch up. For Ivan Herrera, I think they can fix his defensive issues. It probably will take the offseason. Maybe they can work on it in season and get it fixed to where he can go back to being behind the plate. But I think with Ivan Herrera, you can fix this deficiency on defense. And now you all of a sudden look at him and you go, okay, so we've got a catcher that is okay behind the plate with catching runners, and he's offensive-minded. I think that's a piece you don't move on from, especially with Major League Baseball offense being down as a whole. That's not a guy that I really want to look to trade. I want to try and fix his defense first because he does have a Major League bat.
I wouldn't. And I came into the office today with a different tone, but the more I thought about it, T-Bone, you know why you can't trade Ivan Herrera at this deadline to go out there and just get a number 2 starter? Because of what took place to Wilson Contreras about a month ago. I mean, that's not something that was just, I mean, yes, it was a fluke injury, but he was closer to the batter's box because that's what they tried to work with him on so that he can work with that strike zone a little bit better. It's very possible that an injury like that could happen again to Wilson Contreras. And what you can't have happen to you next season is lose Contreras for a month and a half again and then have Pedro Pages as your number 1 starter. You know how they've been able to manage through this rut with all of these injuries, specifically to one of your most impactful bats? Having Ivan Herrera play a majority of the games. It was really just this last month where it started to become a major problem that you had to get Pedro Pages in. So I wouldn't. I think it's going to be necessary for you to have at least 3 catchers over the next few years until whatever this pipeline looks like for the Cardinals that another one can step in, because you don't have the necessary means of a player to step into a role for a large amount of games if you lose Contreras again.
Yeah, and to that point is, okay, now when you lose Contreras, even if Herrera's not behind the plate, you still have his bat. So against lefties,
absolutely,
as we've been talking about, he hit, I think it was, 6th the other day in your lineup? Okay, well, who's doing that against a left-hander if you traded Herrera? Now, they probably would go out and acquire somebody, like maybe they bring in a right-handed bat that could maybe take that at bat, but you now have Pages, who is well below league average offensively. And again, he had a good weekend, so maybe he is starting to, maybe the more playing time he gets, the more his bat can quickly mature to being major league ready. But again, he's below league average. You've got Ciani that's below league average offensively. You've got 2 spots that are well below league average in terms of their offense. And yes, they provide good defense. But again, this team needs more offensive support, especially with the way Goldy and Arenado are playing in the middle of the lineup.
It's amazing to me how many people were getting in on the Air Comfort Service text line saying, guys, there's no physical way that they can carry all 3 catchers when they're back to full health. They did this last year. They found a way to carry 3 catchers, and they can. And somebody said when Tommy Edman comes back, you can't keep him. Jose Fermin goes down. Brandon Crawford probably gets DFA'd.
Yeah, that's probably the move for Edman.
And then when Jordan Walker gets the recall, you're talking about one of Dylan Carlson going down to the minors or Michael Ciani going.
Yeah.
That's how they accomplish this, to keep 3 catchers, because that is an area that the Cardinals deemed necessary for at least what we've seen in the past with Ollie Marmol.
Best case scenario is they can work with Herrera. They fix something. And again, I don't know if it can be fixed in season, but if you can make it slightly better, you can send Pages back down.
Yep.
He can continue his development down to the AAA level, and boom, you've got another roster spot open for a position player.
Yep. He's Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis. I'm Alex Ferrario. We had a little switch in timing. Jesse Rogers is now going to join us at 12:30 later on today, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Jesse Rogers of ESPN will join us at 12:30. And since we're talking trades, let's switch over to the hockey side because Martin Necas' name was brought back up over the weekend, and it included a Blues trade that I'm not so sure it makes the most sense for the team. We'll get into that next year on 101 ESPN.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Over the weekend, the Cardinals won 2 of 3 in Chicago against the Cubs. Tonight, they will start a series in Miami against the worst team in the NL in the Miami Marlins. It'll be Sonny Gray and Braxton Garrett for the first of this series in Miami. 5:40 will be the first pitch tonight. City SC over the weekend dropped their match in Dallas 2-0. They now drop to 3-9-5 on the season. Tonight here on 101 ESPN, we will have Game 5 of the NBA Finals, Celtics and Mavericks. Pregame starting at 6:30, so you can catch Game 5 of that series that the Celtics can win with a win tonight. I'm Grant Francis. The SportsCenter update's been driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
We got a message up on our YouTube stream, 101 ESPN STL, sponsored by the Air Alliance team, that said, guys, Martin Necas won't come to St. Louis solely because you guys have talked about it for the last month. They must not have heard the Ferrario 5 that got Pavel Buchnevich here, T-Bone, because that individual...
And baseball-wise, we got Arenado here.
Look
now,
at this.
That might have been a loss, but...
Well, at the time, it was a win. It was just until last year that it became a loss. Martin Necas' name has come back up. We aren't the ones bringing it up. This was in an article up on The Athletic that talked about trade destinations for Martin Necas. It's very evident that the Carolina Hurricanes are looking to find a better spot for him, and they've said, unless it meets our asking price, we'll re-sign him and keep him here. I don't buy that. I think that's just the business side of it. But this was the quote in the article from Harmon Dale and Thomas Drance that put this together. Quote, if there's one potential trade asset that could intrigue Carolina, it's Pavel Buchnevich. The big question is whether the Blues want to move him, and if so, when? This summer or next deadline? Obviously, the best version of the Blues would have both Pavel Buchnevich and Martin Necas in the top 6, but realistically, the team may feel that younger forward would help them in the long run. And that I can't deny, because he's 25 years old as an RFA, and I think they did the projections of the contract. You're probably talking about somewhere between $5.5 to $7 million for Martin Necas. Now, here's where I'm skeptical of it, and I have been one, I'm not going to be a hypocrite, that has said it might be best for you to trade Pavel Buchnevich. Pavel Buchnevich has played 216 games with the St. Louis Blues. He has 206 points in those 216 games. So we're talking nearly a point per game player. Martin Necas for the Carolina Hurricanes, 243 points in 362 games. His real breakthrough season came 2 years ago when he was 24 years old. He had 71 points. And in the breakdown of Martin Necas as a player, according to Drance and Dale on The Athletic, he's a offensive dynamic player that has top 6 upside, maybe top line upside. And Carolina just did not utilize him well this past season. They were playing him with Jesper Kotkaniemi and Michael Bunting. Those are that's the equivalent of Brandon Saad and Kevin Hayes on your roster. So it makes sense that he wasn't going to have a lot of success this year. But the year that he put up 28 goals and 71 points, he was playing with Andrei Svechnikov, and that's a top-tier player on the Carolina Hurricanes. This is a guy that substitutes defense for offense, likes to play in the offensive zone, and is not the most defensively sound player. If you go down the path of trading Pavel Buchnevich for Martin Necas, which straight-up deal, I'm assuming, dynamically, you're going to have another top 6 player that I think is a good substitute. But you are leaning heavily into we are going to be offensively minded moving forward and take a step back defensively. Because let's go through the top 6. Thomas, Kyrou, Jake Neighbors, Martin Necas. My guess is Dalibor Dvorsky, and then someone that is Brandon Saad / Braden Shen.
And at some point in the future,
Jimmy Snuggerud, yes. Who do you feel comfortable with defensively in those names that I just mentioned?
Thomas, and I'd say Neighbors can become a really good defensive forward.
And honestly, it's the jury's out on Dvorsky and Snuggerud because I just don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, now you are going with 2 guys, and Necas is probably more suited to be a winger than a centerman. Necas is more like a winger than a centerman. You've got 2 guys that you feel comfortable with defensively, and it would be Neighbors and Thomas. I'm a little skeptical of that trade if that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you bring up, and it's not like you have a really good defensive core to lean on either.
Right.
You know, if you had like the Vegas Golden Knights defensive core, I could totally see how you convince yourself, let's go all in on the offensive-minded forwards, and our defense will kind of make up for their lack of defense. Blues don't really have that. So it's an interesting point, but to me, this is the kind of move that I think the Blues should be looking for, because they don't have really a good offensively-minded top six. It's not where it needs to be for a team that is going to be a playoff caliber team / a contender in a couple of years. Now, maybe Dvorsky and Snuggerud change that, but again, there's such unknowns that I would want to go out and try and find more of a proven commodity, and that's where someone like a Martin Necas or someone of this ilk that maybe you could acquire a Pavel Buchnevich for seem to make sense for the Blues. Now, there are some of these things that pop out when you see them, like when the Dodgers cut somebody in baseball, you go, wait, now why is it the Dodgers are moving on when they can fix just about anybody?
Yeah. When
I see that Necas is a -9 with the Carolina Hurricanes, a very good defensive team, it does make me worry about that defensive ability that you're talking about. But to me, Buch doesn't fit into the Blues timeline, so I would want to look to capitalize and get someone that does, who would be 26 next season, that you can sign to a long-term deal or a bridge deal with his RFA status, and have him slide in and see if he works with your group of guys, and with Thomas, with Kyrou, eventually with Dvorsky when he is here. I think this is the kind of swing that the Blues should be looking for. I wouldn't give him a long-term deal. I would try and just make it a bridge deal if you brought him in here. But this is the move that I think the Blues need to be looking at this offseason. Try and get younger and get something that they can have for the long-term future with a Pavel Buchnevich trade.
See, I'm not 100% sure on Buchnevich whether I'd like to see him on a long-term deal here, but I am 100% sure that I would not be interested in Martin Necas at this point.
In general, or a long-term deal?
Really in general, right now.
Why is that?
The fact that of what Tanner just said, the Carolina Hurricanes were the 4th best defensive team in the NHL last season, and he finished a -9. That's not going to do it. And on a team that's already struggling defensively, it doesn't make sense for the Blues, in my opinion. I know, he has his moments where offensively he can be a star, and he has that potential, but the Blues have players that fit that mold. Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou, they have good offensive players. They don't need another player that can score goals and is a defensive liability, in my opinion.
I mean, it's the part that I really don't know, because here's the thing. If I'm trading Buch, I'm trading him to get somebody younger who fits into my timeline. And this is a dude that, 25 years old, he's defensively not sound, but how much of that is like what we're seeing with Jordan Kyrou, or maybe it really was just the coach that just didn't have his ear. Kyrou did get better defensively in the second half last year when Stu Bannister took over. We saw how different he looked. Were there lapses? Absolutely. But I can say that for a guy that has the potential of being a 90 to 100 point player. This guy has been 41, 40, 53, 71 was the most he's been. Is he a point per game player? At best, maybe. To me, is that a difference maker? I just don't know. And here's the other factor that people need to take into consideration. This isn't Necas that you could play with Thomas and Kyrou. Necas plays the right wing and wants to be a center. So he would be your second-line center and probably the winger with Dalibor Dvorsky by the time that Dvorsky's ready to take over that position. And you have to be, if you want to win in the playoffs, and if you don't believe me, go watch the playoffs right now. If you want to win, you've got to be tight down the middle.
Yeah.
That you have to be your best area defensively, with the exception of, your defenseman, is down the middle. That's how the Blues were so successful. O'Reilly, Braden Shen, Tyler Bozak, and Oscar Sundqvist. You've got to be good down the middle. And if Necas is already a liability at 25, what's that going to look like at 28, 29 years old when you're trying to compete?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good point. Being strong up the middle, that's what is winning in the playoffs. When I look at the St. Louis Blues, to your point on his season high is 71 points, what is his ceiling? He could be one of those players that with a change of scenery takes that next step. That's what we've talked about with Kyrou, right? Yeah. When we talk about potentially trading Jordan Kyrou, it's because of the frustration, and sometimes for players to have it click in for them, it is a change of scenery. So maybe that is what you're getting with Martin Necas. It's fascinating. I just don't view – I've seen a lot of texts that say, well, once you trade Buchnevich, you got to go find that type of player. Can Neighbors not be that? Can Neighbors not be a two-way defensive-minded forward for the St. Louis Blues? Am I overselling on what I think he can be defensively? I understand Buch is really good all around on the penalty kill, can play on the power play. I just haven't been as impressed with Pavel Buchnevich as everybody else seems to have been, and I don't think he makes sense for you long-term on a potential 8-year contract that we've talked about. So I'm looking for something that is younger, that can potentially fit in with you long-term, and that's why I think this kind of move, whether it is Necas or it is someone else in this ilk that is around this age frame that the Blues could trade for, to me, that's why I'm pulling the trigger on a Buchnevich deal.
And I'm not pushing back on the trade. I do think what might be best long-term for this team is to find a match for Pavel Buchnevich to where you're not committing to somebody who might be out of that window when you need to actually start competing. I just think right now it might make more sense for you to trade that asset for defense. And look, a lot of this is up to Buch. He determines if you decide to trade him and can't come to a deal, they decide where he's going to go. But I think it might bode well for you or bode better for you this offseason to find a defensive player that you can make that trade for and rely on the offense that you have coming through with the system.
I know we got to go to break, but quick question on this. Are we seeing a lot of people, and I think this is kind of a generic thing you see in sports of like once you trade away someone that's really good at something, it is always, well, how do you replace that guy? And my always answer is I'll just go find it when I need to. How much of this is from learning the lesson the hard way with the Petro departure? You know, when Petro left, it was, well, wait, you shouldn't let a number one defenseman because now you're chasing your tail to go get that guy, as the Blues are doing. Yeah. How much of that is also playing into this Buchnevich decision?
It's a really good question. I mean, to me, a number one defenseman, an elite defenseman like Petro is very different than a top six fringe top line player. Those are different conversations, but you're not just losing a fringe top-line player. You're losing a guy who plays penalty kill, power play for you, 5-on-5 minutes. Every scenario, he's the one that's out there for you. That's a tough thing to just go out there and find. Is it easier to go out there and find that than a number one defenseman? I personally think so. The same with a goaltender, which is why I wouldn't trade Binnington. But, I mean, you're trading away a point-per-game player that plays on the penalty kill, on the power play, and basically every scenario that you can ask for. That, I don't think you could just go out there and find it. I don't think Martin Necas falls into that category with what you would have to pay him if you make that trade. He's Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis. I'm Alex Ferrario. If you've got questions for us, you can send them over 314-399-9646. You can also send them via our YouTube channel at 101 ESPN STL. We'll answer your questions next here on 101 ESPN. We've got another playoff game tonight, which means I've already opened up my Circa Sports Illinois app to set my parlay for the NBA Game 5 between the Celtics and Mavericks. So, because I love all of our listeners, I'm going to let you in on my Circa Sports parlay. It's plus 1,500. I'm taking the Mavs on the money line. I'm taking the under, and I'm taking the over points for Jaylen Brown. If I put $10 on that over on FanDuel, I bring in $125. If I do that on the Circa Sports Illinois app, I make $165. I only use Circa Sports Illinois because of these tight money line splits. They want you to go check out other sports betting apps because they know that by the time you look at all of them and come back, you're going to realize that the best money is with Circa Sports Illinois. Plus, those big parlays that I always talk about making are the future bets. You're bringing in the most money possible because they're not limiting players based off of their winnings. So make sure you download the Circa Sports Illinois app today. Put the money in. Get that parlay going for tonight's NBA Game 5 and enjoy Circa Sports Illinois. If you or someone you know may have a problem with gambling, call 1-800-GAMBLER or text ILGAMB to 833-234.
You've got questions, we may have the answers. Maybe. It's BK and Ferrario's questions and answers.
Presented by Window World St. Louis.com. Simply the best for less.
We've got Katie Wu, our Cardinals insider for The Athletic, joining us in our next segment to talk Cardinals victory out in Wrigley. But now we get to your questions and answers. 314-399-9646. That is our Air Comfort Service text line. We'll start with this one. Guys, did you see the list of potential buyouts on The Athletic in the NHL? Do any of those names interest you? There's one that does. But man, it would have to be like the perfect scenario for the Blues, and it's Jacob Trouba. I don't think the Rangers are going to do that. Frankly, that's a dumb deal if you're them because you're only saving $4 million these next 2 years, and then you're basically paying that back within the next or the following 2 years. And like you've got a window now, and although he had a bad postseason, if they do buy him out, I would take a shot at it. To me, that resembles a lot of what Ryan Suter was when he was bought out by the Minnesota Wild. I always thought that made sense for the Blues at the time, and Dallas picked him up, and he's been a plus player for them in those 3 years. Also in the postseason, he's been a very important top 4 player for you. The thing with Jacob Trouba, though, if I'm not mistaken, is he a right-handed defenseman? He's a right-handed defenseman.
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, unless you're shipping out one of Parayko or Falk, I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense for you. So none of them, I think I'd be willing to pay the price unless it's super cheap.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I don't think there's much interest. If these are the guys that are the buyout candidates this offseason, I don't think any of them really make sense for you. And as much as we want to improve the defense here in St. Louis, well, there's a reason the defenseman's being bought out. So I don't think anybody really makes sense for the St. Louis Blues. I think you just kind of stick with your defensive core if you can't move on from anybody. And in terms of like the forward group, I wouldn't want to bring in a buyout forward and potentially, block a spot for like a Bolduc who could be earning important playing time here with the NHL club.
Yeah, I'm not picking up any of those forwards that get bought out on that list.
Not even Pierre-Luc Dubois.
No, God, no.
Boy, How telling would that be of how Pierre-Luc Dubois is if he gets bought out?
You know what I think might happen? They might buy him out and then be like, you're going to come back on a cheaper deal.
No,
We're not paying you 8x8.
Dude, his name even being in this conversation is absurd.
Yeah.
He'd respond well to that.
Yeah, of course he would, just like he has the last
He's
few
a good
years.
team player, you know.
That's what I've
they've
heard
said
about him.
There was one forward on here that I was kind of interested in, not too much though. JG Pajot.
I was going to say, is it your Islanders guy?
I really like JG Pajot, and you could get him on the cheap. That's the thing. And he's a little bit up there in
31.
age. Yeah, 31, so not too old, but you could probably get him on a 1 to 2 year contract. Worst case scenario, you can shift him to the wing and use him in a different role other than center. But in the meanwhile, while you're building another player up to take that second line spot at center, he could step in it and play well there. I think JG Pajot would be someone that I'd be just keeping an eye on.
I think he
Little Blues news to pass along if you want. If you want to call it news.
It's better be good.
So Doug Armstrong is having his pre-draft availability today, and it looks like it's wrapped up. This coming, speaking of buyouts, from Matthew DeFranks, a buyout is, quote, from Armstrong, not something that we have on the front burner.
Yeah.
So it does not look like the Blues are exploring buying out somebody, which makes sense. We've talked about that. It doesn't really make sense to buy out Torrey Krug or Justin Falk.
Try and trade him, and if you can't trade him, you're going to run it back with him one more year, and you just put him in a bottom pair role.
And I did find this interesting as well from our previous segment, talking about trying to acquire, say, a Martin Necas for a Buch. He doesn't foresee moving a first to improve this year's team unless the acquisition is in the right age bracket. So that is something that's a little interesting as well. Kind of what we talked about, but it doesn't sound like he really has an eye on moving that first round pick, if you ask me.
BK just texted us this too, because BK was there at the meeting, and so we'll have some audio of that tomorrow on our show. But Brian Elliott is going to be the goalie development guy. God, I loved Brian Elliott.
Loved him when he was here.
Brian Elliott. All right, we got to get to Katie Wu, but I got one more question to answer before we wrap it up. Guys, should Mason Wynn be the team's all-star this season?
I'd say yes. I think him and Helsley will be the two that will probably go.
Is there a case for JoJo Romero to be an all-star? I mean, I know he's had like 0 closing opportunities, but my dude has been one of the best relievers in baseball.
Yeah, it's so hard for setup men to get in, but like Kittredge did it a couple years ago with Tampa Bay.
Pat Neshek did it too for the Cardinals, right?
There's a fair argument to be had that JoJo Romero should be an all-star.
I think they have multiple pitchers that are all-stars this season. And you're going to have one position player maybe, and that position player to me would be Mason Wynn.
My guess is it'll be Wynn and Helsley. That would be my two that I would guess.
Be interesting. All right, we've got Katie Wu, our Cardinals insider for The Athletic, coming on next with us here on 101 ESPN. Along with Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. No BK for the final stretch. Today he filled in on the opening drive. Brooke Grimsley will be back by next week, so BK will be in for the full week here on BK and Ferrario. And for the third straight week, he misses out on our favorite, second straight, because Katie rescheduled on the one because she needed her BK. But we've got Katie Wu with us. She knows who the two goats are on this show. It's T-Bone and Alex Ferrario here on BK and Ferrario. Katie, how are you?
I'm good, guys. I think we should just rename the segment T-Bone and Ferrario, and I think we'd probably just have better viewership all around, right?
Katie,
at this point, I'm taking it personally.
Katie, did you do that on purpose because you knew I'd be offended by putting T-Bone's name first?
Yes.
Okay. You know what? Hey, Katie, I appreciate you because you were honest and you went in full swing, and I love that.
And let's be honest, it just rolls off the tongue easier.
It does. I mean, it's my name, stupid Alex. Come on, come up with something better than that. Katie, I know you saw a little Kenny Chesney over the weekend, am I right?
I did, and I have made a miraculous recovery. I was a little worried with that 12 o'clock roasting start that I, might not have a voice or anything. But no, great show. Obviously, 3 day games in Chicago. You can't beat that kind of vibe. And I decided to just finish it off with some Kenny Chesney. But unfortunately, no Miami vibes for me this week.
Oh.
I know, so rude, right? But it's all worth it. I'll be heading to Rickwood early for a really fun game against the Giants out in Birmingham. I love the meaning behind this game, so I'll take it for now. But South Beach, I'm coming for you next year.
That sounds good. Well, Katie, we had a entertaining time watching this Cardinals team, which is an odd thing to say, but look, they took 2 of 3 against the Cubs. They've done this now in 8 of their last 10 series in terms of winning or splitting the series. This Cardinals team is the best team in the National League since Mother's Day. As much as I still don't buy into this team being able to do damage beyond the regular season, I can't deny what we're seeing right now. They're finding ways to continue to pick up victories, which Cardinals fans should start to keep their eyes on.
Oh, absolutely. Hey, we said it before. Winning teams win series. And I think the Cardinals, while there's certainly, and everyone will agree, an ability for them to play better overall, they've taken care of business since that disastrous stretch in Milwaukee where we thought, we were seeing the demise of a team in May once again. They've been one of the National League's most consistent, if not the most consistent teams. They're 500, which is not necessarily something that we should be celebrating here in St. Louis, but given the National League overall, that's the 5th best record in the NL. So the fact that the Cardinals are 500 and have played really consistent ball without Wilson Contreras, without Lars Nootbaar for a good chunk of this time, with Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado still not really being the bats that they expected, I think it's a testament to their overall team, and really it's a testament to the pitching, guys, that starting rotation, and that bullpen especially. They've just been lights out.
And Katie, you mentioned Goldy and Arenado, who still are kind of scuffling along. Goldy especially so far this month. Can the Cardinals be better than a 500 team if those two guys don't hit in the middle of the order?
I think if they are, if Goldschmidt and Arenado are having seasons that were, relative to what we've come to expect here, they're multiple games over 500. I'm thinking at least 4 or 5. To me, they still can't reach their full potential when you have $60 million on the corners and they're not really performing the way that they've expected. But that's what I think Wilson Contreras coming back to this lineup, which I'm sure we'll get to, will allow them to kind of breathe and relax a little bit because these guys know their responsibility. Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado, they've been in the game a long time. They carry this weight personally. They know that they need to supply the power in the heart of the order. They know that they haven't, and they know that that's cost them games. So I do think they can be over 500, but that's mostly just because Wilson was looking so good before he was hurt. And I think they have the bullpen and the starting pitching to keep them afloat. But obviously, no breaking news here. If you get a second half surge where Goldschmidt and Arenado look more like what we've come to expect, you're feeling a lot better about this Cardinals team. How
much, Katie, in your mind changes when Wilson Contreras comes back? Because the one part that I always keep in the back of my mind is that's not just a simple injury that he had. That's something that I don't think he's going to get back to his normal self right away.
So I'll put it this way. When Contreras was cleared for baseball activity, I walked in the clubhouse, and it was like a noticeable change in the atmosphere. People were excited. He was excited. I mean, he was running around high-fiving and hugging everyone, telling everyone how soon he'd be back. Look, it was a serious injury, but that bone is completely fixed. And, yes, this rehab assignment, which begins Tuesday in Memphis, is a big one, but I think if Contreras has 3 or 4 rehab games where he's feeling good to go, he'll be in that lineup, honestly, maybe even earlier than Monday, potentially Saturday, though that would be a stretch. So, yeah, there's going to be concern. There's always concern when guys come back from injuries. I personally don't feel that way about Contreras. I think the energy he'll bring back to the lineup is contagious. I think his play over, April and early May was contagious. So we will certainly see. I'm excited to see what the Cardinals do when he comes back. I can certainly see a scenario where Pedro Pages stays up and Ivan Herrera kind of takes over that right-handed bench role that we've been talking about. They have the flexibility to do that, but with the way the Cardinals have been playing and how, effective they've been and that they've found ways to win games even without being 100%, getting Wilson back only skyrockets you up. And I'm excited to see what the Cardinals can do as they take advantage of that going into July. It's big to what President of Baseball Operations John Mozeliak told me last week. Getting this team healthy will be pivotal in how the Cardinals attack the trade deadline and ultimately their second half.
And if Contreras comes back and is back to being himself, Katie, and say the Cardinals end up getting to a point where they are multiple games above 500, does that change, you think, the outlook for the front office in terms of what they are buying, in terms of being super aggressive and maybe searching for a number 2 starter?
I'm sure every fan and honestly the front office would like to get a number 2. I actually think the biggest conversation and the biggest people that have to answer this trade deadline is Bill DeWitt II and his ownership group, because they ultimately will have the power to give Mozeliak more leash or release the reins, but it does depend on what this team looks like healthy. Contreras is a huge piece, but so is getting Lars Nootbaar back. So is getting Tommy Edman back. Now, the good news is that Tommy Edman looks much closer to starting a rehab assignment, and they're not going to put a timeline on it because they have been wrong about that timeline really over the last 4 months. I don't really think that's anyone's fault. I think that's the nature of the injury. But Nootbaar could be back before the All-Star break. Edman as well. Steven Matz we're seeing too. These are all key pieces. Giovanni Gallegos could come back as early as today. If they get those players back and they're right, could that be enough for ownership to say, hey, the Cardinals are playing in a weak National League. They can still easily make a run to being one of the top teams in the league, maybe not Dodgers level, but that's, nobody is. Just how aggressive is ownership willing to be at this deadline, I think is the bigger question rather than the front office.
And Katie, you mentioned Tommy Edman, who could be going on a rehab assignment here soon. What do you think their plan is in center field when Edman comes back? Do you think they'll stick with Ciani or they'll throw Edman back out there like they had originally planned?
I think it'll be Edman starting in center field, and that's no knock on Ciani, who's done a really nice job. We've talked about the depth, right, and the lack of it, but a good majority of that, and this is something that Mo brought to light as well, is because the guys that they brought in specifically as role players have had to be everyday starters. Ciani is his absolute best as a late-inning defensive replacement. He's an elite center fielder. He's great at bunting. That's his skill set. That he's been relying on, or that the team has had to rely on him in the 9-hole for offense in key moments is a bit unfair because that's not what he was brought in to do. So if you put Edman back in the outfield, you're seeing a lot of Brennan Donovan really coming to his own as a left fielder, something that we all saw coming, right? And then you have Burleson in right field. He's done a nice job. You have to keep that bat in the lineup because he's one of their most consistent hitters. But that would allow the Cardinals to deploy Carlson and Ciani in the ways that they were designed to at the beginning of the year, which is reserve roles, late inning roles, and it makes your bench a little bit deeper. So I would fully expect Tommy Edman, when he does come back, to be back in center field. I'd like to see what that would look like with Donovan, who mentioned in Chicago. By the way, Brendan Donovan, great games in Chicago, a little bit under the radar, but defensively, what a star. I'd like to see how that offense looks, and it would allow Ciani to be used when he's at his best, which is coming in off the bench late games for defense.
Katie, on the pitching side of things, we're going to get into this a little bit later on today, but after watching Mike Liss go out and have another superb outing once again, we've seen it with Kyle Gibson. It's hard for me to deny what this pitching staff is doing, although I continue to find myself not believing that this is actually what we're getting out of the pitching.
I wonder if it's just because as Cardinals fans, people haven't really been accustomed to having a quality starting rotation over the last 4 or 5 years.
You're not wrong there.
This is legit. And you know what? I do think we harp on the front office a lot. We harp on a lot of things about this organization. But John Mozeliak and his front office were so adamant that they were going to go out and improve the pitching staff. And they did it in a way that wasn't exactly orthodox and brought even perhaps more skepticism than they did in the beginning. But they had a plan and a vision, and they stuck to it no matter what the outside voices said. And it's worked exactly as they've imagined. Look, I know that Sonny Gray over the last couple of starts, his last one notwithstanding, went through a little bit of a lull, but, you're not going to get 32 shutout starts from every single one of your starters. Kyle Gibson has been quietly, I think, the team's most consistent player. You know exactly what you're going to get out of him. And then with Miles Michaelis, over the last, really, 7 starts, he's had 5 straight quality starts, but his last 7, the overall body of work much more indicative to what they expected from him coming into the season. You'd like to see Lance Lynn go a little bit deeper into all games, but when you have a bullpen that's built with this depth, you can get away with something like that. It goes on to kind of emphasize just how important it is to get Steven Matz back and healthy, and maybe at the trade deadline find one more depth piece. And you're feeling a lot better about this rotation because the arms that they brought in have more or less done exactly what they were brought in to do.
Katie, final question from me. You ran through the outfield there just a minute ago. Donovan, keeping Burleson in the lineup, and then potentially Tommy Edman, and right now Michael Ciani in center field. Do you think we could be getting close to seeing potentially Jordan Walker get called back up? So far this month, he's starting to hit for a little bit more power, and his OPS has now creeped above 800 this month.
Yeah, I talked to Mo about Jordan Walker because, he was supposed to be a huge part of the supplementary power. We've talked about this before. But with Jordan, it's not just about what he's doing from a box score perspective. They're going to be really careful that when they bring him up, it's for good this time. So if he has a couple of great weeks in Memphis, awesome. They want that from Jordan. But they're looking for more long-term sustainability, so they're not going to rush him up out of need. They're going to rush him up, or they're going to bring him up when he's ready, and what they need to see is a more consistent swing, less on the ground, more line drives. They need to see better pitch selection, just an overall rehaul of a swing, and that takes a long time. He was able to do that somewhat quickly in 2023, but now we're having questions about whether or not those changes were sustainable because here he is 1 year later in the same position that he was. So I do think the Cardinals have learned their lesson in terms of developing these young players, are at least in the middle of learning their lessons there, because with Jordan, they really want to make sure that he is right when they bring him up to give him long-term success. I still think it's going to be a little bit before we see him, but we're certainly not ruling out a call-up, before the end of the season. It just depends on the results that he can make actually being long-term.
Katie, always outstanding stuff. We appreciate you hopping on with us weekly. You can check out Katie's work over at The Athletic and on Twitter at Katie J. Wu. And Katie, don't be too upset about not missing out on Miami because it feels a lot like Miami here in St. Louis right now.
I'm actually getting my car serviced right now, which is, I think, a slap in the face because I could be at the beach. But it doesn't feel great outside. No. I'm doing this in the parking lot. It doesn't feel great.
Well, it's raining in Miami right now, Katie, so look at it that way. You could be getting wet right now.
I feel better.
Yeah,
okay.
See, there you go.
I still want to be in Miami.
Enjoy the week, Katie. We'll talk to you next week.
You got it, guys. Thanks so much.
There you go. Katie J. Wu with us here on 101 ESPN. And I think going back to what she said about just the offense in general, T-Bone, and with Goldschmidt and Arenado, I feel like that's where a lot of people fall with those guys not hitting that ceiling that you expect for them to be good is when you get Wilson Contreras back, let's judge this team. Because right now you know who they are. They're a 500 club. When you get Wilson Contreras back, what do you look like with that bat in the lineup? Because does that take less pressure off of those guys? And because he is such an impactful bat, does that fill one of those voids for you?
Yeah, and maybe it does, but to me, you got to have three big boppers in the middle of your order to be a successful playoff team and potentially even to get to the playoffs. And I just don't know if you can do that if you don't have two of those three guys not hitting. And if Contreras comes back, look, that's going to be a much-needed boost to this offense. To me, it just still comes down to Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado. Are they the guys that they're supposed to be, this elite corner that's supposed to be one of the best in baseball? And right now they haven't been. And I agree with what Katie said. This team would be multiple games above 500 if those guys were what we were expecting coming into this season.
He's Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis. I'm Alex Ferrario. We'll have Jesse Rogers of ESPN join us in about 15 minutes or so. But coming up next, without Goldschmidt and Arenado, like we just discussed, Katie talking about that, can the Cardinals overcome this version without those two in the lineup? And we'll discuss Nolan Gorman, who quietly is going through a really bad drought. We'll get into that next here on 101 ESPN.
this will be the best they can be if Goldschmidt and Arenado are not Goldschmidt and Arenado. You can't ask players to be something they're not. It's going to be hard to be better than this when other guys are definitely going to be more fringy producers because that's what they are. They need their big dogs to be their big dogs. Ken Hitchcock said it all the time when he was the Blues head coach. In the playoffs, you need your best players to be your best players. Well, I will change that a little bit and say, to get to the playoffs, this team is going to need their best players to be their best players. I'm legitimately worried about those two guys. Paul Goldschmidt has the worst strikeout rate and the worst walk rate of his career. And Nolan just doesn't hit the ball hard anymore.
That was Kevin Wheeler with Derek Gould on the best podcast in baseball discussing needing Goldschmidt and Arenado to hit their ceiling. Along with Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. You can't deny that Goldschmidt has been better as of late than where he was at the first of the season, because at the beginning of the season, he was basically your worst hitter on your team. Nolan Arenado has just kind of consistently been around close to average, but it's just been all singles. There's been no power with him. There's just no danger when he's at the plate. It's just single. That's been Nolan Arenado. Goldschmidt this month, a slash line of 228, 254, 316. Arenado this month, slash line of 280, 345, and 400. That's 280 batting average, 345 on base percentage, and 400 slug. Those are complementary piece numbers when you're getting that from Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt. And this is where you and I have always been. And I know BK falls on the other side of this to where, yeah, you need those guys, but if other complementary pieces can come through for you, you can find a way to win in a different way. That may be true this season in this dog poo of a National League, but when push comes to shove late in September, or when you get to the playoffs and you're talking about going into a wild card game, or if for some wild reason you get to a NLDS, these two guys have to be your best hitters. And if one of them's not there, then a Wilson Contreras has to be into that for you. But we're seeing right now Nolan Gorman go through a massive slump. Burleson, Wynn, those guys I don't anticipate being this awesome for the remainder of the season. So I'm on the side of Kevin Wheeler. Your best players have to be your best players if you want to get anybody to really believe in what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, that's where I am. And I think they can probably make the playoffs. Like, I would amend a little bit of what he said, because I think they can probably squeak in. But, look, it's not going to be sexy. It's not going to be something that you're going to write home and remember 10 years from now going,
it's going to be 81 and 81.
That 2024 Cardinals team. But I'm kind of with you. They're very vulnerable right now when it comes down to their lineup because of what these guys aren't doing. You know, when I look at teams, someone asked us in our opening segment, like, well, how do you guys judge? Like, what are you judging on a winning team? I look at their flaws. You know, if you don't have a number 5 starter, which Cardinals haven't really had till Palante kind of took over that role, okay, that's something that is fixable. If you don't have a good bullpen, that is something that is fixable when we go towards the playoffs. If you don't have your 2 highest paid players that hit 3-4 in your lineup not hitting, you know what doesn't feel fixable? That. And that is something that you cannot just replace with a snap of your finger once you get to the trade deadline. And Gorman can be a middle of the order hitter at times, but then he goes through these long stretches where he struggles. The first 38 games of the season, a 640 OPS, and was striking out like 50% of the time. Then he got hot for 20 games, where he hit 9 home runs and had 1,000 OPS. And in the last 6, he's 2 for 24 and has struck out 50% of the time again. Like, at times, yes, he can be in the middle of that order, but he is more of a complementary piece that you don't have to push up there because he does go through such massive roller coasters throughout a season. It's why I am still skeptical to an extent on what the St. Louis Cardinals can be if Goldy and Arenado are not hitting. I don't think they can be much better than a 500 team if their 2 best players don't play like their best players, because otherwise you're starting to lift everybody up to those new roles, as Wheels had said there, to where all of a sudden you've got to rely on, you know, Nolan Gorman to be a middle-of-the-order bat. Nootbaar has to be a middle-of-the-order bat when he comes back. Contreras is a middle-of-the-order bat, but he's got to play even better than what you're expecting because those 2 guys aren't carrying part of the load for him as well.
Yeah, well, and I know it's been a touchy subject on this show, but we've brought it up, and I think now it's a lot more relevant. Those guys' overall numbers, great, But runners in scoring position, to me, are the most important one because we're talking about these players being able to perform late in the season and in a playoff spot. If you're not able to hit with runners in scoring position now, what makes me think you're going to be able to do that in the biggest stage for you in the season? And like just in the last 30 days, if you're looking through some of these numbers, just go off of OPS, like Mason Wynn, an 804 in the last 30 games. Nolan Gorman, a 794. Paul Goldschmidt, 729. Brendan Donovan at 688. Alec Burleson, 669. Arenado, 668. Like, those numbers right there are what they've done in the last 30 games. Do I believe that Mason Wynn is going to be an 800 OPS for the remainder of the season? No, I think that's where you need Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado, and you need Mason Wynn and those other guys to dip back to where those two are at. And I just don't buy into the fact that Goldschmidt and Arenado can get to that. Now, it does change if Wilson Contreras comes back and he's the same Wilson Contreras, because I think that's one of those middle-of-the-order bats. And if you tell me that I can get this version of Paul Goldschmidt the rest of the season, all right, maybe you can do a little bit more damage than I originally expected. But once you get beyond those three names, Goldy, Contreras, and Arenado, Wheeler's right. You're right. I'm asking Burleson to be a superstar. I'm asking Gorman to be a superstar. I'm asking Nootbaar to be a superstar. And that's not how this team was constructed. This team was constructed with those guys coming up with big at-bats in different scenarios of a game.
And to serve as your right-handed power as well, to that point.
Right.
You know, when I think of, okay, well, who are going to be the Cardinals' like three best power-hitting right-handers, it was Goldy, Arenado, Contreras / Walker. Well, Walker's not here. He's in AAA. Contreras will be back, and he played well when he was healthy, and Goldy, Arenado just aren't hitting for that much power. Goldy's looking better, but even in the last month, he's really cooled off to where he's slugging .316 in the last
He's got
so
4
far
home
this
runs
month.
in his last 30 days.
Yeah, and I would bet that a big chunk of those came before we started June, because his slash line is almost below 300 so far this month.
Yeah.
Like, that's not good enough. They cannot replace that guy in their lineup at the trade deadline or internally, in my opinion. And that's where I've continued to have the skepticism of this team. Are they playing good baseball? Are they stringing together wins? Is the pitching good enough to keep them in these games in the regular season? Absolutely. But are they going to be able to make the playoffs if those guys don't hit? I still think it's up in the air. I think they can probably squeak in because there are a lot of other big holes on these other NL wildcard teams. But, man, that is such a significant hole that just cannot be fixed.
7 extra base hits in the month of June for Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt. So that's doubles, triples, home runs, 7 of them in the month of June for those two guys. And I mean, that is overshadowed by Alec Burleson's got 7 of them. Nolan Gorman has 5 of them. Brendan Donovan has 2 of them. Dylan Carlson has 2 of them. It's just not good enough. And that's where it really comes down to looking at those two guys. Now, you mentioned Nolan Gorman, and this is kind of a quiet slump that he's going through. So right now, and T-Bone, you broke this down last night, looking at just kind of isolated with Nolan Gorman number. First 38 games, a 191 batting average with 5 home runs and 11 extra base hits. The next 20 games, a 282 batting average, 9 home runs, 11 extra base hits. And then in the last 6 games, he's 2 for 24 with 1 home run, 12 strikeouts, and 0 walks. You can win with Nolan Gorman, but you need Nolan Gorman to be less streaky if you're going to rely on his bat to be a main piece of this roster.
Yeah, and I don't even worry. Let me rephrase it. I do worry about his streaks to an extent, but he shouldn't be the guy that you have to rely upon to help carry the offense because of the ebbs and flows that he goes through. Your offense should be deep enough and good enough in the middle to where when Gorman is hitting his peak, all of a sudden this offense looks like one of the best in baseball. When Gorman is hitting his valleys, the offense is like still fringe top 10 offense in baseball. And I worry that while he goes through another cold spell, that you're really going to see this offense take a significant step back while Goldy and Arenado are still not producing power-wise in the heart of that order.
He's Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Alex Ferrario, Graham Francis as well. We'll ask Jesse Rogers about this team. He saw them over the weekend in Wrigley Field. If without Goldy and Arenado at that top level, what he thinks the ceiling is for this Cardinals team. We'll get to that next with Jesse Rogers here on 101 ESPN. Got a text from my buddy Darren, owner over at Rhino Shield, over the weekend, and he sent me a picture from Pace Real Estate. They just used Rhino Shield to update their metal low-sloped roof, and he sent me a before and after picture, and you can see the massive difference that Rhino Shield has when they do take care of your exterior. Whether it's the siding, whether it's your roofing, Rhino Shield can bring the best out of your home, out of your business with their product, because they don't use paint. You hear paint. That is the kind of stuff that gets washed away with tons of rain. That gets deteriorated with all of the UV rays beating down on it. What Rhino Shield uses is a 2 to 3 coating process of a ceramic coating that sticks 8 to 10 times thicker than paint that you're going to buy from the hardware store. So what that means for you is when you use Rhino Shield, you're going to have that new look for 25 plus years. They back it by a 25-year transferable warranty. I use it on my home. We did it 3 years ago. Looks brand new today. And it does whatever type of siding you have, whether it's aluminum, whether it's block, wood, cedar. You heard me mention they can do metal roofs. Call Rhino Shield. Tell Darren Alex Ferrario sent you and get the coating of a Rhino. 877-25-RHINO, 877-25rhino.com.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. It was a good weekend for the Cardinals as they took 2 of 3 up in Chicago against the Cubs. They will be back in action tonight in Miami as they start a series against the worst team in the NL in the Miami Marlins. It'll be Sonny Gray on the mound for the Cardinals tonight going up against Braxton Garrett. 5:40 will be the first pitch from Miami. Over on the pitch this weekend, City SC's struggles continued as they dropped their match in Dallas 2-0, and they now fall to 3-9-5 on the season. We'll see if the Boston Celtics can close out the NBA Finals tonight, as Game 5 of that series will be on 101 ESPN tonight. 6:30 pregame for Celtics and Mavericks Game 5. Boston can close out the NBA Finals tonight with a win. I'm Grant Francis. The SportsCenter update's been brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
So now we've got 2 Cardinals-Cubs series in the book as we inch closer and closer to the Major League Baseball All-Star break. And before you know it, it'll be the trade deadline at the end of next month. And one of our favorites here on BK and Ferrario is the great Jesse Rogers, who covers Major League Baseball, including the White Sox and the Cubs for ESPN.com. You can follow his work at Jesse Rogers ESPN. He saw the Cards and Cubs in action this weekend out at Wrigley Field. Jesse, it's great to catch up with you, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. What's going on down there?
Well, a lot of inconsistency down here in St. Louis, because you got one side of the pack that looks at this Cardinals team and says, but they're not any good. They're 500. They've been less than 500 pretty much all season, and that's who they are. But there's the optimistic side, like my co-host, who's not here today, who believes that this team is better than people are giving them credit for. So, Jesse, after seeing them this season, after watching them this weekend, where do you fall on who this Cardinals team is?
Yeah, I did not love their chances coming into the year. So at this moment, you might say that from my perspective, they're overachieving, to be honest. I did not think they'd get back to 500 as they have. So in some ways, they've been a little bit more impressive lately, but I had a different perspective than others. I thought the Cubs actually would contend for the division and the Cardinals would not. I'm not sure the Cardinals will, but certainly they've been flipped lately. I mean, the Cardinals look better than the Cubs, and I think they showed that this weekend. They just have a little bit more going for them than Chicago, but neither team is ready to challenge the Phillies, the Braves, or more importantly, the Brewers for the division title. So thoroughly impressed by Milwaukee, not so thoroughly impressed by either St. Louis or Chicago. So I'm sort of damning them with faint praise. They're better than I thought they'd be, but that's still not that good.
Yeah, and Jesse, the one thing that we keep coming back to, me and Alex, is the fact that Goldschmidt and Arenado really aren't hitting still. And when you look at their numbers, they've kind of they've gotten streaky here of late, but again, overall, they just not have been good. How does the equation change for the Cardinals if Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado get back to being the guys that you expected coming into the season?
Look, that's an easy analysis to make, and I get it. But on the same side, I think Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson have probably pitched better than most people thought. So what if they regress while Arenado and Goldschmidt go forward? Or what if Gorman or Burleson regress? Yeah, I mean, in a perfect scenario, you have everyone going in the right direction, but that rarely happens. It's possible Goldschmidt and Arenado are going to show their age, and they're just going to have the seasons that they're having, or more maybe likely is they get back to the back of their baseball cards. But I'm not so sure that assures you of anything unless you could tell me that Gibson, Gray, Michaelis, those guys and Land are going to keep on going. I have faith in Sonny Gray, not so sure in the rest of them. So, again, it's just like the Cubs in a way. You could take a step forward in this area, but I'm not sure you won't take a step back in another area. So I'm not sure you can convince me that either team is all that great.
I think the hard part for me, Jesse, in terms of just analyzing this Cardinals team is really the subpar National League. I see what they have just done. They just beat up on the Cubs. They beat up on the Pittsburgh Pirates. All of these teams are middling teams like the Cardinals. But I've also seen them go head-to-head with the Phillies. I've seen them get shellacked in 2 different series against the Brewers, and then, of course, against the LA Dodgers to open the series. I don't really know if anybody, with the exception of the Braves in the National League, should strike fear into anybody.
You're right. However, and this is a capital however, the Arizona Diamondbacks, for the most part, looked like crap in the second half last year, snuck in, and went to the World Series. And that is the sort of poster team now for anybody that thinks that they don't look great now but can look great later, especially if you're healthy in October, especially if you're healthy on the mound. So I think owners around the league are more than willing to try to sneak in, maybe with a less-than payroll, and then take their chances in the playoffs. With 3 wildcard teams, you don't have to look like a world beater. And it's not lost on executives that in the last 4 full seasons, the 19, 21, 22, and 23, the bottom seeds in the National League have gone to the World Series. Think about that. In 4 straight years, the bottom seeds have gone to the World Series. So it really is a crapshoot in October. And we've seen the Dodgers lose. We've seen juggernauts lose. So I don't think anybody cares if you can't beat the Phillies in June or July. It's all about getting in and trying to beat them in October.
And what you said, Jesse, is what I feel like a lot of our listeners fall back on, especially my co-host, BK, who talks about, the Cardinals basically can be the Diamondbacks from last year. I'm hesitant to buy into that because the Diamondbacks had that elite pitching down the stretch that really pushed them into an elite defense. But let's just play along with that. If the Cardinals can be the Diamondbacks, what's the area that they fall onto that gets them there?
Well, once you get in, it's got to be Sonny Gray. Like, he's got to lead the charge, right? That's number one. And then whoever if Lance Lynn can find the fountain of youth all the way through the year, great. If it's Kyle Gibson, great. If it's Michaelis, great. It's got to be your starting pitching. I mean, once they got there, Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly were amazing, and then they found Brandon Pfaadt as the third guy in the playoffs. Now, the other side of that is also bullpens win you championships and get you there, and the Diamondbacks' pen was awesome. So I guess the path is really not – that's the part that hasn't changed. It's on the mound. Starters, bullpen, we've seen it go both ways for teams. That's what has to happen, and I don't know if the Cardinals have enough. I really don't, whether it be starting or relieving. But that's today. Come October, it could look different. Down the stretch, Arizona pitched lights out from both ends, starting and relieving, and that's why they got as far as they did.
And Jesse, speaking of the pitching, I'm with you. I don't think the Cardinals have a playoff caliber rotation. We'll see about it maybe being one that is successful in the regular season. But one name that we've started to see he is in the trade speculation is Eric Fedde with the Chicago White Sox. Is he a guy that can be a number 2 in a playoff rotation? And what do you think it would take to get him from Chicago?
Not too much. I mean, a good prospect. Let's start with that. I mean, he signed for next year at only $7.5 million. I mean, that's nothing. So it'll take a good prospect, but not like 3 or 4, anything crazy. But you're going to have to, give up something. I mean, I go back to a Cub trade they made a couple years ago. David Robertson was a decent reliever, okay? Not Mariano Rivera, but also not nothing. And they traded him to the Philadelphia Phillies for a guy named Ben Brown, a decent prospect who now is in the Cubs rotation. He's hurt right now, but he will be for the next 5 years. And that's the kind of deal. Like, you got to give up something, a good piece, but it doesn't have to be like your best prospect. So that's what it comes down to for these deals. A little bit more with a year on his deal and a favorable contract, more than it would be if it was a 2-month rental. And absolutely, Fedde can be had. But I do think Getz is not going to just give him away. You got to give him somebody that's going to be on the major league team and contribute, whether it be 1 or 2 guys, but it's not like a 4-for-1 or anything like that. He's doing it for a half a season here. His sweeper is good. He is for real. No idea what he looks like in a pennant race compared to a team in the cellar. But, yes, I think teams will line up for a guy like Eric Fedde.
Jesse, and just a couple more minutes with Jesse Rogers of ESPN, who's with us here on BK and Ferrario. How do you view this trade deadline? I know we still have some time with this, but we talked about the muddy middle of all of these teams that feel like they've got a shot. And, you referenced that Diamondbacks push where a team probably believes they could get into the playoffs and do some damage, which tells me I don't know how many sellers there are going to be at this deadline, which means the prices are going to be steep.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I do think we'll see a few more down the I don't really think the Nats are going to go for it. I think Kyle Finnegan would be on the move. Mike Rizzo would be silly not to trade him at his peak here. So, I think a few teams will back off. Teams I don't think will back off will be the Diamondbacks. I don't think the Reds are going to back off. I don't think the Cardinals. I mean, you guys, I imagine Mozeliak's desperate to get back in. with the tradition of that franchise. I don't think the Cubs are going to be sellers. So it would take a lot for the Cardinals and Cubs to be sellers, in my opinion. A lot to change between now and July 30th. I think the Nats will be, for example, though. Certainly the Mets will be. Who else is on the fringes there? San Diego won't. So, I mean, there'll be a few more teams that will, but you're right. The prices will be high. There will be more sellers than buyers because of the third wild card, because there's so much mediocrity. And again, I can't stress this enough. I've talked to executives and owners. I was at the owners' meetings, and they love what the Diamondbacks did last year because you know what that means. You don't have to spend for 100 wins. You can spend for 84 wins and get to the World Series. But it doesn't happen every year. Like the Diamondbacks had a dream run. You can't expect that every year. You have to fortify yourself. I'd rather be a 100-win team. It just proves, though, you can be 84, 85 and go far.
Jesse, you mentioned you've talked to executives. What are they saying about why we're seeing offense down so much so far this season?
I mean, I actually spent time at the league office about a week ago. They said give it a little more time. It's only a little bit behind last year, but even last year with the changes wasn't enough. Here's my point. Like, I thought last year would be step one, and then this year they'd go to another. Like, the hope was that the launch angle era would kind of come back down to earth with the elimination of the shift. You see more line drive swings and stuff like that, but we really haven't seen it. Pitchers continue to adjust maybe quicker than hitters. They think it'll get better as the summer months come along. I'm not so sure. Other than they don't have much of an answer, I will tell you that. The league doesn't have much of an answer, so I'm not sure that I do. One theory of mine is also with the new schedule, an ancillary effect is you're seeing teams one time. You're seeing pitchers one time. You're seeing relievers one. It's harder to prepare. Like as a hitter, when you played the division so much, you got used to the pitching, and maybe you had an advantage later on in the season. Now you're seeing these one-time deals, and it's advantage pitcher. Shota Imanaga is a great example. He's faced 12 different teams in 12 starts, and he has such an advantage, especially as a rookie. So I wonder if the new schedule is helping pitchers out a little bit more than hitters. But other than that, I think that they're just crossing their fingers that the summer months will bring more offense.
Jesse, we always love the opportunity to catch up with you, man. Enjoy these next few weeks headed into the All-Star break and the trade deadline, and I know we'll be catching up with you again once we get closer to that.
Absolutely. Have a good one, guys. Take care.
There you go. Jesse Rogers of ESPN.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Jesse Rogers ESPN. I do want to hone in on one thing he said, T-Bone, and then we'll get into the juncture on the other side, and we'll get more into this, too, in the 1 o'clock hour, but He was talking about pitching, and we were talking about the playoffs, and he said pitching gets you through October. And it's something we've talked about on the show. It's something BK has brought up a lot. And because he said that is why I don't just want to go for a number 5 starter. If I'm the Cardinals, you got to go for a guy who can be starting game 2 for you in the postseason. Because if pitching is what gets you through the playoffs, Sonny Gray, or he just said it, Sonny Gray, Sonny Gray, Sonny Gray. That works in the wild card round when you just need 2 wins. Or just 1 win if you're in that position. But once you get to the DS, you're going to need somebody else to step up. And, I mean, I look at the rotation right now. Sorry, because I know Miles Mikolas has been great. I don't think Miles Mikolas is a pitcher or a performer for you in the playoffs. Kyle Gibson, maybe. But the Philadelphia Phillies freaking said he's not a pitcher in the rotation for us in the playoffs. Now, I know they're stacked, but that tells you where they're at. And Lance Lynn hasn't been a playoff performer since 2014. You've got one guy who pitches in the playoffs. And if you go out there and get an Eric Fetty, although I like Eric Fetty, I don't think he's a dude that you trust going into a game 2. I think it's Severino. I think you're talking top echelon, which tells me the Cardinals aren't going for that.
Yeah, I agree with what he said of pitching gets you through October, and that's why I have pushed back on, when we talk about can the Cardinals be what the Diamondbacks were last year, they need to upgrade the rotation if they're going to do that.
Agreed.
Because when you looked at the Diamondbacks, Merrill Kelly and Zach Gallen, that's an awesome 1-2 punch. And look, they had to have Brandon Pfaadt become Brandon Pfaadt of postseason. Otherwise, they're not dancing that late into October. And then you look at the Phillies, it's the same conversation. Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola, and then you've got Suarez, who's a really good number 3 starter for you that emerged for them. When I look at the Cardinals, I think they've got the perfect regular season rotation. Their rotation is giving them a chance. They're posting every single day, and they're keeping games close. But when you look at Kyle Gibson and you look at Miles Mikolas, they're not really playoff caliber pitchers because they just don't have as much swing and miss as you would like to see. Lance Lynn's got some swing and miss, and he's kind of 5 and dive, so maybe you could get away with him being like your 3 or 4 in the playoffs, but they clearly desperately need that number 2. And that's why I asked him about Eric Fetty, because I was curious the way he thought of him because he sees him since he's up there in Chicago.
Yeah.
And he said his stuff's legit, and he's putting up legit numbers right now. So if that's the case, I don't think it's going to – he mentioned it's not going to cost you a lot. He probably makes the most sense for the Cardinals. You know, he's going to have team control next season, and that $7.5 million is a pretty good steal for a guy that could be a number 2, worst case scenario, a number 3. I think he's probably the Cardinals' top trade target, I would say, right now, going into the trade deadline as a guy that can come in, slot ahead of Kyle Gibson, Miles Michaelis, and Lance Lynn, and really try and solidify that number 2 spot and see if he works in October.
And for me, I don't buy into that. Now, I'm not going to deny what Jesse's saying because he has seen a lot more Eric Fetty stuff or games than I have. But a guy that has not performed in the playoffs or pitched in a playoff game, I'm not so certain is the one that can lead me to the promised land in terms of winning a playoff series. But I could be absolutely wrong with that one. So that Jesse Rogers, if you missed anything with our interview with Jesse Rogers, you can check it out on our podcast page, 101ESPN.com. Thanks to our friends, sponsors, Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers. We'll hit the junk drawer next. Carlo Colaiacovo joining us in about 15 minutes. But junk drawer is after this here on 101 ESPN.
Open it up. The Junk Drawer with BK and Ferrario.
Brought to you by Fenton Bar and Grill. Best trashed wings in Missouri. Dine in, carry out, 7 days a week.
We've got former Blues defenseman and teammate of Alexander Steen, Carlo Colaiacovo, hopping on with us in about 5 minutes or so. But now let's dive into the junk drawer. T-Bone?
So I saw a headline over the weekend that said, video shows people stuck upside down on amusement park ride.
Oh, my God, I saw this.
And I immediately went, well, that's interesting. Let me click and see what this is. And it's one of those rides, I think it's where you're sitting in like a circle, got your harness on.
It's like Excalibur at Six Flags, if people remember that one, that spins you in circles and then flips upside down.
Yeah. This time it flipped upside down and did not come back down.
Nope.
And I watched the video on this and I was listening to what they were saying about it. These people were stuck upside down, and finally the machine came back on to where they could lower themselves down. Firefighters were preparing to unhook them from the ride and have them come down on rope.
You're upside down, and they would unhook you on the ride. Imagine being how long were they upside down?
They didn't say how long they were upside down.
The video that I saw, and like, no joke. So this is like that balance beam. So when it flips you up, you know, it rocks and then it tips you back down. They were stuck 180 degrees upside down. And so these people were just dangling upside down in their buckles.
Oh, I'd be freaking out.
I would unbuckle myself and just say, Jesus, take the wheel. Because I'm not going to sit up here upside down for that long. The blood rushing to your head. And if I'm waiting for the firefighters to get on their cherry pick, get up top, unstrap me, and flip me down with a rope, I'm going to pass out from blood loss.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I would be freaking out while this was going on. And like, I'm terrified of heights.
Me too.
So like this kind of thing would freak me out. Like I don't do roller coasters because I'm terrified of heights.
Yeah.
So A, I would never be on that ride. But B, if I was on that, oh my gosh.
Dude.
Talk about change. I'd never go back to amusement park.
Somebody
again.
texted in and they said they were upside down for a little over 30 minutes.
Oh, that's too much.
No way. This is why I don't do carnival rides. Right here. My sister, I think I've told the story before. My sister, when we were younger, we were in Branson, which should the start to the worst story ever. She wanted to do those bungee jumping things, you know, where they like strap you around your waist and you go flying back and forth. So her and her friend did it. And I'll never forget, I was like 12 years old. I'm like, I'm not bleeping doing this. They started to lift them up and they brought them back down. And the person that was working was like, oh, sorry, we didn't strap you in properly.
My bad.
And they buckled her and then they took them back up. I said, are you stupid? You went back up on that?
Oh.
I don't do carnival rides.
That doesn't surprise me.
No, it doesn't surprise you, but this is exactly why I don't do carnival rides.
Yeah, this kind of stuff terrifies me.
Oh, my God. Yeah, I saw that video, and I about had an anxiety attack. So, moral of the story, ladies and gentlemen, don't do carnival rides. Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. That is the junk drawer. Carlo Colaiacovo, former Blues defenseman and teammate of Alexander Steen, joins us next here on 101 ESPN. Alongside Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. BK and Ferrario here on your home for the Blues 101 ESPN. Doug Armstrong just wrapped up his roundtable with the media prior to the upcoming draft on June 28th and June 29th. And one announcement he made was Brian Elliott taking over the goaltending development with the player personnel. So Brian Elliott's going to be working with the Blues moving forward. And we found out last week that Alexander Steen is a part of the succession plan for the Blues moving forward. In 2 years, Steen will take over as the general manager while Doug Armstrong takes over as the president of hockey operations. And I thought no better to call with the news of Alexander Steen than his former teammate with the Toronto Maple Leafs and with the St. Louis Blues, was involved in the same trade with Alexander Steen. He is Carlo Colaiacovo. He's the co-host of First Up in Canada, and he joins us now here on our 101 ESPN guest line. Carlo, it is great to catch up with you, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm actually just waiting for my call from Doug Armstrong to see if I wanted to join the band back in St. Louis, maybe as assistant GM alongside Alexander Steen, and so that we can still forever be connected.
Well, I mean, the band is getting back together, Carlo. I mean, Elliott, the goalie coach, you got Steen as the GM. I was thinking either assistant GM or the development coach for the defenseman after your tenure here in St. Louis.
Well, Doug's got my number. If he's that serious about it and wants to make it happen, I'm all ears, willing to listen. So, look, it's exciting times in St. Louis for sure. I would imagine, some surprise news for many, but for Alex, I couldn't be happier for him.
So, Carlo, you played with him for a majority of his career. You've seen kind of how he grew in the National Hockey League. He was always one of those players to me that I felt like was going to be in the front office at some point, just how he gravitated towards other players. They gravitated towards them. But when you heard Alexander Steen taking over as general manager, what was your reaction?
Surprise. You said that most people probably thought of him, being in a front office role. That's a role, I'm going to be honest with you, I never envisioned Steener, being in. And so, I know he came into the organization last year as an advisor and was doing some European stuff. But to hear the news that he's been elevated to an assistant GM for the next 2 years, and then there's a succession plan for him to be GM, came to a surprise for me. But, maybe not to a surprise to many in the organization who know Alex, probably a lot better than I do, especially over the last couple of years, and to see where his mind is at in the hockey world and stuff like that. But considering the bloodline of the Steen family, I shouldn't be surprised. His dad played a long time in the NHL. Alex played a long time in the NHL. Won a Stanley Cup, served as a really important member for the St. Louis Blues throughout his whole career. And, fascinated to say the least that this is the direction that the St. Louis Blues decided to take. But I would love to spend a little bit more time with Steener and reconnecting and sort of get his vision and then to where his whole mindset is on the game of hockey, because it didn't seem like he was this close to the game, but clearly he was more than I thought and deserving of the promotion that he got.
So, Carlo, the one thing that now that you're talking about that, when you look around the National Hockey League in terms of general managers, we're seeing a lot of guys that not only played in the league that are becoming general managers, but played in the league like somewhere between 2005 and 2010. I think you're talking about like half of the league right now have players that played kind of in that late window there of the late 2000s. Do you feel like that's kind of the state of the league now, where you're starting to see a lot of those former players step into front office roles?
Yeah, I think, the direction of the front office is trending in the same direction as the game on the ice, right? I mean, you see the way the game has evolved and how it's transitioned to a younger game with younger players. And you'd have to think that, the time frame that you just mentioned between 2005 and now is a lot of where the game has transitioned to the game that it is now. The players are different. They train different. They play the game different. They're different characters. They're different personalities. And so there's a lot to manage more than just the game, the way the game it was before, where, you play in a league that was a little bit slowed down, a lot of pushing, a lot of shoving, a lot of grappling. And more physicality, where now you've seen a lot, it's a different game and it's opened up. And, the one thing that still bothers me about where the game has gone to is I think there's a lost importance of how valuable veteran guys can be in the roles they can play inside a locker room. And I think Steiner is one of those guys that still probably values that because he was that for the St. Louis Blues, and he brought a lot of his experience and played different roles for this team that helped him win a Stanley Cup. So I think when you're talking about the transition in the league, I think that's why you're seeing it, is because guys that are moving into those roles are more closely connected to the game and the way it's played now and to what players are having to deal with on a daily basis. So it makes people in management, or at least people involved in management, it allows them to at least grasp a little easier on what players deal with on a day-to-day basis.
And Carlo, with the Blues announcing this is going to be the first time that we've really seen this kind of power structure within the Blues organization in 2 years, where you'll see Doug Armstrong overseeing things as the president of hockey operations and Steen making the roster decisions as the GM. You've seen this in Toronto. How have you seen how this power structure really works, and do you like the way it is set up?
Well, it's kind of Toronto is different than the way most teams are set up because they're run by a big corporation. They're not run by an individual owner or an ownership group. And so when decisions are made, they have to go through different layers to make that decision. And I know Toronto has, Brandon Shanahan, who's the president, and then they have Brad Treliving, who's the manager, and then they don't really have a hockey ops department, but they have a lot of people that surround the manager. I don't think I've seen a team with more assistant general managers in Toronto. But I think it's you could look at it many ways. As teams around the league, operate the normal way. I think it's all dependent on what the owner wants to set in place and what the people in management feel comfortable operating with either having more voices around them or less voices around them. So I think what is unique to the Blues situation is I don't think we've ever seen a plan like this laid out, a succession plan like this laid out so far in advance. I think to me that's what caught me by surprise too, is you're basically telling your fans and your organization how things are going to be for the next 5 years. Well, hockey I think is the most evolving sport out of all of them, where you see so much change year after year on the roster, on the coaching staff, within management, that to sit here and to lay out a 5-year plan when you don't know how each year is going to go with the organization seems kind of unusual to me. But with Doug Armstrong being there and having the success that he's had and laying the groundwork, this is something that he clearly feels confident knowing that he has the trust and ownership and, the understanding of, obviously the relationship between him and Alex Steen and the relationship with people in management. So it's odd, to say the least, to have a guy who, like Alex Steen, who hasn't really been working in the front office up until last year, given a limited role, to come in as an assistant GM, have two years to learn on the job, and then get thrown into the label 2 years before it happens. Because, like I say, things change so much year to year. And I started doing some reflecting on the St. Louis Blues and how far they've come since they've won their Stanley Cup. And you go back to that roster in 2019, that roster was built to win at least 2 or 3 championships.
Yeah.
And to think that they only won 1 with the roster that they have assembled, I hate to bring this up because I know it brings up a lot of it brings up a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth, but I really do think the decision to part ways with Alex Pietrangelo was one that has really put the organization in the position that it's in right now, because you just wonder if they would have found a way to keep him, how much different the roster would look, and how many cups or how many championships or how long playoff runs would we be talking about the St. Louis Blues. And then it just seemed like things started to fall apart since his departure. You move on from David Perron, you move on from Vladimir Tarasenko, you move on from Ryan O'Reilly, and now you're stuck with a roster that's competing to make the playoffs every year. So it's kind of a weird way to look at the Blues, but it is real time considering the succession plan that they've laid out. And you just hope that for the Blues fans and the organization, it's one that has a lot of success.
I really think it's a great point by you, Carlo, because we talk a lot about the Petro decision and kind of where that put the team. But, you talking about the difficulty of kind of looking that far in advance with the hockey team, it felt a little like that's what the Blues were trying to accomplish. What COVID hit, it was not so much looking at what the season they had right there. It was envisioning what it was going to look like 4, 5, 6 years from now. Is that the scary or the dangerous part that teams can get into when you try and project too far down the road and it hinders the here and now?
Well, just ask the Buffalo Sabres, right?
Yeah.
And maybe even the Ottawa Senators. I mean, just seems like every 5 years they're putting together a new 5-year plan. And it hasn't worked out. And when you have a league with this much parity, it's really hard to predict and project what things are going to look like 5 years from now, right? I mean, especially, I can't remember what the number is, but it's a really bad one when we talk about how many coaches have been replaced over the last calendar year. I think it's been somewhere, 15 or more coaches, at least half the league that has been replaced. So that alone should say that, obviously there's a lot of pressure to win in the league, but there's also no guarantees in the league either. And I think for the Blues, I think it's easier for them to project 5 years down the road because you look at the age of the roster of the guys they committed around, and plus all the young prospects they got coming up the pipeline, which are very promising. Maybe 5 years is the number to look at, or maybe 3 years is the number to look at. But, like I said, you're 5 years away from winning a Stanley Cup. And I know COVID put a halt in some of the plans that maybe that Blues core had. But to me, I just think it's a real shame that, 5 years ago we were talking about this team being Stanley Cup champions and maybe going on a 2-3 year run. And here they are in almost a complete rebuild, and they're already talking about what their next plan is going to be with the people that they have in charge.
Carlo, always great to catch up with you, man. Outstanding perspective as usual. And if you want to hear more of Carlo Colaiacovo, you can hear him up in Toronto on First Up, Monday through Friday from 6 to 10 a.m. Always appreciate the time, my friend. Enjoy the rest of the offseason. And before we know it, we're going to be right back into the regular season, my man.
Yeah, let's hope we get a Stanley Cup sometime soon and start the offseason, because we all know we need one right now.
Amen to that. Carlo, always appreciate it, man. Take care.
Guys, anytime.
There you go, Carlo Colaiacovo. Appreciate him. And remember, and I don't know if you were with us at the time, T-Bone, or if it was me and Jamie and BK, but he was the one, Carlo, when the whole Petro negotiation was going on, that told us, hey, as soon as you trade this away, you're going to be searching for him. And he compared it to the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I'm not here to stick in the past, Carlo bringing that up. But what I do find very interesting is Doug Armstrong has always operated with the future in mind, not just this season, but 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now. And Carlo's right. I think you're referencing Buffalo, who's been doing that. Ottawa. Edmonton did that all the way up until they drafted Connor McDavid, and then finally that future outlook started to make sense. Toronto's been kind of doing that up until the point where they felt like they had the big four, and now they're talking about that future look. That is somewhat of the mess that got the Blues in where they're at right now, of looking 3, 4, 5 years from now, trading for Justin Falk with the expectation of not getting Petro locked up and then moving on. Now, to the Blues' credit, they had some unforeseen circumstances, too. Bouwmeester going down in the middle of the season, Steen having his back injury that hindered him being able to continue to play. Those guys don't get injured. Maybe you're talking about a little bit of a different scenario, but I do think Carlo brings a great perspective of what the other side looks like.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing that across all sports, of looking out more in the future than looking at the here and now. I think you really see that in baseball as well, to where you see a lot of those GMs, executives not want to move prospects. Why? Because they're afraid of losing that trade and seeing someone get away. Cardinals know a lot about that one. But Carlo was right when he said at the time, and we continue to talk about it, the Blues are still searching for that number one defenseman.
Yep.
As good as I think Colton Parayko is, I don't know if he's an alpha dog number one. he's like a really solid 1B, but you need someone to pair with him. And, I find it interesting that he brought that up about GMs looking that far ahead 5 years into the future. And I was kind of looking through Steen's time here in St. Louis because I was curious, okay, was he ever a part of a team that would have really gone through that kind of a retool era? There were those couple of years where the Blues
when
really
he first
fell
got
out of
there, it was when.
But for the most part, Steen was always a part of a team that was a playoff team. So I wonder if he's going to still have that mindset of I want to push, really once you get this retool over with, just sustaining that model. And I think when you start to think 5 years out down the road, it's a little harder to be in 5 years, how are we going to be making the playoffs? You've got to really shorten that viewpoint down to a year or two.
Someone texted in and said, how many Cup teams actually keep it together for that long? Tampa did for 10 years.
Yeah, Tampa, Chicago did when they had their dynasty run.
Yeah,
Kings, to an
Kings
extent.
kind of did, but Tampa's a perfect example of it. Tampa 2014 was when they lost in the Stanley Cup final, 2015 to the Blackhawks, and then up until that point, conference final, missed the playoffs, conference final, bounced in the first round, Stanley Cup final, and then the last 2 years they lost in the first round. Kept it together for 7-8 years, and now you're starting to see that core age. I'm not saying it's the best way to do it, but T-Bone, you're right. Steen's got an opportunity, and that's probably why. And again, I go back to the quote that Lou tweeted out after that press conference that for some reason I missed. But Armstrong essentially told Stillman, because Tom Stillman was thinking like it's somebody who's inexperienced, to the point of what Carlo said. And Doug Armstrong's pushback was, let's not miss out on something great because we're uncertain of what he's going to look like. Meaning Steen's going to go elsewhere and have success. And if he believes in Alexander Steen with the inexperience, you take a chance at that one. So, but again, Carlo Colaiacovo, if you missed any of that conversation, you could check it out up on our podcast page, 101ESPN.com. We'll take a break. When we come back, you send us a scenario. We will tell you if we are in or out. 314-399-9646 here on BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN. 314-399-9646 is our Air Comfort Service text line. Up on our YouTube channel at 101 ESPN STL. Our chat, better known as the Graveyard, up and running. And you send us a scenario. We will tell you if we are in or out here on BK and Ferrario. I'll start things off here. Fellas, in or out after hearing Doug Armstrong speak with the media. You are in or out that the Blues will not be picking at 16th overall. And for people that don't know, he spoke with the media a little bit ago. BK sent us the audio. JR, Lou Korek, all tweeting some things out. But this is what he essentially said about that number 16 overall pick. Obviously, some attractive players. My experience is when you pick at number 10, there's 9 great guys. When you pick 16, there's 15 great guys. It's just going to be fluctuating on who's available, whether we move up, back to gain an extra asset. But we will not be trading the 16th overall pick for a player that helps us now unless he's in the same age group.
I'm going to say out. I still think they're picking at 16. It's clear he has an idea of what they would want if they look to move that pick. But I think if they're getting, like, say, Martin H's, for example, you could probably get him for Buch.
Yeah. If
you don't re-sign Pavel Buchnevich or get a contract extension figured out here once July 1st kicks in, they can start negotiating. But I would say I am out on this. I think they're just going to hold on to that 16th pick. I kind of agree with BK. It is a little alarming that I'm seeing teams like screaming from the mountaintops of we want to trade this pick in the top 10. That makes me a little worried. I think they'll just hold on and stay pat.
I just think those teams that are screaming that are desperate to win now, and they realize that you can't wait. You're going to be waiting a couple of years to get these guys to help you. The one thing for sure about this draft is there's maybe one guy that is going to benefit a team right away. And I don't even know if that one guy, the number 1 overall pick, is even going to be playing in the NHL in his first year.
You know what? I'll go in on this. I think, I don't think Army's done on trying to move one of those defensemen with no trade clauses that the Blues have. Given last season it didn't work out, I kind of have a feeling he's going to try again this offseason. One team that I keep an eye on, and I brought him up earlier in a commercial break, is the New Jersey Devils. They've been rumored to basically want one of everything this offseason. They want a good forward, they want a defenseman, they want a goaltender. So they're kind of they seem like they're in desperation mode to just bring NHL players in and try to get back to making the playoffs, because they were a team that looked like they could do some damage in the playoffs a couple years ago and then fell back this past season. I wonder if Doug Armstrong tries to send a defenseman to New Jersey and maybe their 16th overall draft pick and move up.
A quote that got me was, he said, I see it as a selection type of draft for us. So meaning if a player is at a reachable destination that they really want, that's when you trade up. Trade back if the guy is gone by the time they get to you, but it's not going to be a trade that pick for a position player now. So I'd say I'm in on that. T-Bone?
Guys, in or out? We will see Jordan Walker before the All-Star break back here in St. Louis.
I'm going to say in, mostly because you're starting to see some of what you've been trying for. Now, I know what Katie said earlier today was like, it's not just about a short sample size. It's about going on an extended run. But in this month so far for the Memphis Redbirds for Walker, 265 batting average, 2 home runs, 5 extra base hits with a 346 on base percentage and an 815 OPS. I think you're starting to see what they were hoping for. If he can continue that, I would say we might see him on that final road trip before you go into the All-Star break. Try and get some success then, and then take that time while you're off during the All-Star break to get right so that you're ready for the second half. So I'll say I'm in.
I'd go in on this as well. This is one thing that should probably be a priority for the Cardinals, is get him up when he's playing well. That way he can sort of hit the ground running when he gets up to the big leagues. So I'll go in on this. I think, seeing him have success, if he's able to sustain it a few more games, they should bring him up at that point.
It's interesting because I would say out. I don't think you see him till post All-Star break. And I think it could be one of those where you call him up like right after the All-Star break ends. Like I'm looking at the Redbirds' schedule for July. I wonder if you have him play down there in the minor leagues because of what Katie said. They want to see sustainable success. Look, we've seen guys go through 2-3 week hot periods. I think if he has success through that All-Star break, I could see where they maybe call him up right after you get back from that All-Star break and you say, okay, you had a month and a half of success. Let's now bring you up, bring you with us as the All-Star games come into an end, and let's see that second half surge like we saw last year from Jordan Walker here at the big league level. I think they're going to be very patient and wait this thing out as long as possible to see that and make sure that it is sustained success, because I agree with Katie. Once you call him up, there is no more going back down. And I think that for the long term, not just this season alone.
Grant?
All right, so I'm going to go back to something that Doug Armstrong said earlier today as well. Jeremy Rutherford tweeted this out on the pending UFAs, which is Marco Scandella, Kasperi Kapanen, and Sammy Blais.
Oh, jeez.
We're going to let them test the market, and we'll see what's there. We haven't closed the door on anyone. So in or out, they sign at least one of those three players once they do not get a deal on the open market.
I get why you said out so fast, but here's why I would say in. I think they bring back Marco Scandella.
I was going to go the same route.
I don't think Kapanen or Blais are back. I think we can all agree that Jakub Vrana is pretty much off into the sunset.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about him.
I could see them coming back to Marco Scandella, but him saying we haven't closed the door yet is because you're coming back on our terms. It's probably a two-way contract, or it's minimum, because what he said was we're not going to block somebody in growth for a player to bring them back. So they want to keep their cap space open to see what happens via trade, via free agency, if something becomes available to them. I wouldn't be so fast to say out, because I could see them bringing back a Marco Scandella and saying, we need you as a veteran presence.
So I'm trying to run through the defense in my head. Parayko, Leddy, Falk, Krug, Tucker.
Perunovic, Kessel.
Do you need to have Scandella?
I don't think you're going to have all of those guys on this roster. I think you're going to see one of Perunovic, Krug, Leddy gone.
See, I think you're going to have all those guys, and that's where, like, if your scenario plays out and they move Perunovic and, Krug, or just one of those guys, I would agree. I would totally agree that you can at least have the conversation with Marco Scandella, but I think I'm just at the point where I don't really see them being able to move on from Krug. And I think they hold on to Leddy for now to try and stay competitive. And he played well with Parayko last year.
Yeah.
That I think your defense is set. You've got 7 guys there that we just listed. So I don't know if you need to bring in another one to it probably wouldn't hurt them. You still have defensive depth. He's a veteran that could help them out. But if I'm Marco Scandella, I think he can get a contract with somebody and be on their third pair.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a Robert Bortuzzo for you, where if you get him cheap, he's a perfect third pair penalty killing defenseman.
And when we go
that
to
can
trade
go
him,
in
we
and
can
out.
get like a 6th round pick.
Hey, you never know. You never know, am I right? And that worked out for the Blues, didn't it, with that 6 they got for Robert Bortuzzo?
Sure.
All right, Air Comfort Service text line 314-399-9646. In or out, the Cardinals will get a number 2 starting pitcher at the deadline, but have to give up a prospect like Tink Hens.
I will say out on this, not so much for the fact that they won't acquire a number 2, but like if Eric Fetty's the guy they go after, it won't cost you Tink Hens. Jim Bowden had a trade proposal today in The Athletic. It was like Cooper Jerpy and Gordon Graceffo for Eric Fetty. That seems about right. So I would say out that I think they could target a number 2, though I'm skeptical. I just don't think it's going to cost as much as a Tink Hens would.
I don't think they're going to target a number 2. I think they'll say, especially with Miles Michaelis pitching better as of late, if that continues, I think they'll just say Miles Michaelis is our number 2 and then run it back and maybe go after a 5th starter because, who knows if Andre Palante is able to continue this throughout the remainder of the season. But I don't see them going after a number 2 starter at the trade deadline.
I'm going to amend this one a little bit from Justin. Believe it or not, Nolan Arenado won't win a playoff series with the Cardinals.
Boy. It's not trending in a good direction.
What are you talking about, man? 500, baby.
I will say out, mostly because I would like to see them win a playoff series. I think this team is flawed, and I still believe this team is flawed, and I am questioning how deep of a playoff run or if they can make the playoffs if Goldy Arenado don't hit. But if those guys do get hot and in a best-of-3 playoff series, Sonny Gray gives you a chance to win a game. Right now, the rotation as a whole is giving you a chance to win games. I will say that they can win at least one playoff series with Nolan Arenado, so I will say I am out on this.
I'm going to go in on it. I don't think they're going to win a playoff series with Nolan Arenado. I mean, they had a much better chance, in my opinion, to do damage in 2022 than they do now.
Agreed.
So if they're not going to do it in 2022, I don't see them doing it now.
I think he's going to be here for the remainder of the contract, which is why I would say out on it. I do think they win one, but I mean, I think we're talking towards the end of his time in St. Louis, and I don't know if he's your everyday third baseman at that time. I think he's a complimentary piece for you. That's when I feel like that next window that steps up, I think is when you're talking about a series winning the playoffs. I think as he's like the star player, I don't foresee yourself winning playoff series with him.
I agree to that to an extent. Like he'll be the third baseman every day as long as he's here. But will he be able to shift into the complimentary? Well, that would be my question. Can Nolan Arenado be more of a move himself into the idea of being a complimentary piece, and the Cardinals organization move themselves into that direction and be willing to say, okay, you're no longer middle of the order of bat. We have to improve upon you. And as you get deeper into that contract, he's not making as much. He's not a $25 million guy. I think in the final year he makes like $17 million. So it's a little easier to swallow him as a complimentary piece, but you still would prefer he be the superstar that you traded for.
Tanner Hendrickson, Grant Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up next, this Cardinals rotation has been really dominant for them over this last stretch of games. Are we buying into the pitching being the reason why this Cardinals team is going to be in the playoffs? We'll get to that and give you a shot at winning some Green Day tickets next year on 101 ESPN.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Over the weekend, the Cardinals took 2 of 3 in Chicago against the Cubs. They'll look to continue rolling tonight as they start a series in Miami against the worst team in the NL. That is the Marlins. Sonny Gray versus Braxton Garrett tonight for Game 1 of the series. 5:40 will be the first pitch. Over the weekend, the struggles continued for St. Louis City SC as they dropped their match in Dallas 2-0. They drop to 3-9-5 now on the season. We'll see if we can get a winner in the NBA Finals tonight as it's Game 5 of the Celtics and Mavericks NBA Final. Celtics can win this series if they were able to take home the win tonight. Pregame will start here on 101 ESPN at 6:30. I'm Grant Francis. The SportsCenter update's been driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Strike 3. What a job by Pajes to frame that baby. Strike 3. It backed up. 4 strikeouts for Gibson. And another strikeout on a corner. That's 5 of them for Kyle. Wow. He is up, down, in, out, corner to corner.
Kyle Gibson was everywhere on a Friday, helping the Cardinals pick up that victory against the Chicago Cubs. And really, it's been the pitching staff for the Cardinals. As much as I like to push back with this team, and I'm negative Nancy with this Cardinal squad, I can't deny what the pitching's doing. Now, are they doing it against superior opponents? No, but everybody in the National League, that's not the Phillies and the Milwaukee Brewers and Dodgers, are inferior when it comes to their offense. But over their last 5 starts, these are the numbers for Lynn, Gibson, Michaelis, and Gray. Lynn has gone 24 1/3 innings, 2.96 ERA. Gibson, a 2.2 ERA, where opponents are batting 208 against him. Michaelis, a 2.59 ERA. Opponents are hitting 177 against them prior to yesterday. And then Sonny Gray, a 2.96 ERA. Opponents are hitting 153 against him. Like, I think in their last 30 days, the Cardinals have the second best ERA overall in Major League Baseball. Not the National League, in Major League Baseball. Which is why I can't be negative about it, because they are getting the job done. They're managing the rotation the right way. The bullpen is able to close things down for them, and they're finding success. But I still find myself, T-Bone, as I mentioned with Katie earlier today, I still find myself doubting this pitching staff. And maybe it's just because I look at the postseason. I don't really care about the regular season because of the state of the National League. I know Sonny Gray is going to pitch like a number 1 for you. I know that Kyle Gibson is much better than we gave him credit for, as he is finding ways to stay consistent. The 2 that I fall back on is Lance Lynn, who we've seen have his ups and downs, and Miles Michaelis. Those are the 2 guys that for some reason, even though they are pitching so well in the stretch, I still watch it and say you have to upgrade.
Yeah, I think you have to upgrade for the playoffs. But if you're talking regular season for the St. Louis Cardinals of how do you get to the playoffs, you can't talk about playoff baseball without being in the playoffs. I think you've got a rotation that is a really good, solid regular season rotation to where I'm kind of with you. I don't think you're going to see this from Miles Michaelis, Lance Lynn, those kind of numbers, kind of long-term the rest of the season. And I'm a little skeptical on Kyle Gibson, but hey, I'll tip my cap. He's been fantastic.
Absolutely.
He's been arguably one of the best signings in free agency from a year ago. But what I like about all those guys is even if Michaelis does regress some, if Gibson or Lynn does regress some, you know what they do every day? They post every day and they give you a chance.
Yeah.
And with offense being down across the league and the Cardinals' offense with some question marks of will Goldy and Arenado get back to being Goldy and Arenado, it's nice to be able to say, at least I don't have to worry about what I'm getting from the rotation. Because for the most part, I can say every time that those 4 guys take them out, I know what I'm going to get from them. For Lance Lynn, I know I'm probably getting 5 innings. It's going to probably be 5 and dive, and once you get the 3rd time through the order is about the time when you should really hit the panic button and go get him out of the game. But I know what I'm getting. I'm going to get 5 solid innings, hopefully. Of late, he's gone through a little bit of a scuffle, but I think he'll get that figured out for the most part. For Kyle Gibson, I know I'm getting 6 innings every night. For Sonny Gray, for the most part, I know I'm going to get some strikeout stuff and I think I'm going to get 5 or 6 innings out of Sonny Gray. And for Miles Michaelis right now, it is, I know exactly what I'm getting from him. He's going to go 6 innings every time. That just makes life so much easier if you're Ollie Barmola of saying, man, what am I going to get from this pitcher tonight? I know. Unlike last year where it was, all right, well, what is Wainwright going to do? He's probably going to get shellacked. What is Jack Flaherty going to do? Is he going to be able to find the strike zone tonight? They don't have those kind of question marks, and it's why I think this is a sustainable rotation for the regular season to try and get you to October. But I'm with you. When you look at October, this kind of rotation doesn't really stack up with the ones that you look at across the National League.
It just seems fragile. And maybe that's where it comes from. I saw a text pop in that says the exact same thing. Maybe that's how I fall on it, because it feels like one of those things where you're driving a beat-down car, but you know what? It's getting the job done for you. It's getting you from here to there, and you've got no problems. But, man, when one thing goes wrong, you open up the hood and you start to find everything wrong with it. And it feels like when one of these pieces break, then the whole thing falls apart. And, look, they lost Sonny Gray at the beginning of the season, and they found a way to kind of somewhat keep their head above water, although it didn't look pretty those first couple of weeks. They've lost Steven Matz, although I didn't really expect him to be that impactful of a pitcher. The fragility of it is maybe where it comes down to, because it still feels like it's just a streak with these guys. It doesn't feel like I'm watching something that I know is going to be from now until the end of the season.
See, I don't feel that way, because when I think of a fragile rotation, I think of what you had last year, which was a very old Adam Wainwright that was coming off of injury, if you want to call it that, when he took the line drive off of his, I think it was shin, if I remember correctly. Jack Flaherty, who was coming off of injury and was injury prone. That, to me, is a fragile rotation. Now, do I think there will be regression? Because I don't think these guys are like some of the best pitchers in baseball. Yeah, I kind of expect that. Just like I would expect a car, the older it gets, the less reliable it becomes.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's fragile, because I think you can at least say that these guys are going to post. And, we've seen the worst-case scenario of Lance Lynn. The worst-case scenario of Lance Lynn is, he goes 4 innings and gives up, maybe 5 runs. And, if he just does that a handful of times, that's fine. It's not like last year where you saw, it was consistent with Jack Flaherty, where it was, man, you're just not getting anything out of him. He's going 3 innings. He's going 5. It was sporadic is what the rotation was last year. I think why I feel better about it is it's consistent. Mm-hmm. It may not sustain at the level in which these guys' ERAs are, below 3. It will fall back more, and it will regress more towards their career norms, but it's consistency that I love in this rotation that doesn't make me question it.
Well, and here's where I can understand people pushing back with me. You've got consistency and trust in this bullpen. And, we've talked a lot about it. Now, I know that game on Saturday got out of hand because of the bullpen. To me, I think you pulled Palante a little too early, but that's here or there. Your bullpen has the ability to step in when a guy doesn't have his best up and complete the rest of the outing. That's, to me, is a part that does fix the fragility, if I believe that the rotation is fragile, because if something does happen down the stretch, your bullpen has the ability to come up and cover for you. And as you look at the wild card teams, out of all of these wild card teams, your bullpen has been one of the best. You've got Cincinnati with a 3.51 ERA, the Mets with a 3.63 ERA, then the Cardinals, San Diego's below you, Washington's below you, San Francisco's below you. And we've already seen the upside of what you look like compared to Cincinnati and the Mets. So the bullpen is going to be able to keep your head above water and hold that down that fort. The question is, are they going to be able to separate themselves with everybody else? And to me, I think that is the special weapon that you have.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think this bullpen is the kind of thing, when we talk about separating, I think it comes down to 2 things. It comes down to, what do you have something that you're elite at that other teams don't? And I think the bullpen can be that for the St. Louis Cardinals. And the second one for me is, do you have your best hitters overall end up taking that next step forward? That one will be the biggest question for me if the Cardinals can separate. But the Cardinals bullpen is very good. It is very deep as well. They're running 6 guys deep right now. You trust 3 lefties in the pen in Joe John King and Matthew Liberatore. You trust at least 3 righties in Andrew Kittredge, Ryan Helsley, and Ryan Fernandez, who's been fantastic so far this season. And potentially Chris Roycroft. We'll see more of him as he gets in. Who knows what Gio looks like when he comes back.
Yeah.
So the bullpen is very deep to where you have multiple options. I'm not worried about burnout for some of those bigger arms, to where okay, I think it's going to be a top 10 bullpen by the time you get to the end of the season. That's going to separate yourself because we saw what a bad bullpen looks like last year. Last year's bullpen was terrible at blowing
two
leads.
Guys.
And I saw this stat from Bob Nightingale earlier today that was just amazing, talking about the Chicago Cubs and their bullpen, because their bullpen, speaking of the wild card teams that are below you, Chicago is 23rd in terms of bullpen ERA at 4.39.
Wow.
If games ended just after 7 innings this season, the Cubs would be 50-19. They're 3 games below 500. That shows you how bad their bullpen is. They are
That's what you were last year.
33-36 exactly. And now you don't have to worry about that. You can go get Andre Palanta. You can pull him early from the game if you feel like, man, he just doesn't have his best stuff. I can turn to my bullpen and we can really cut games down and really shorten the length of games and really mix and match very well. I think that's the thing that could potentially be the separator for the Cardinals. You look at the rest of these wild card teams, Cubs, Diamondbacks, Pirates, they're all near the bottom in terms of bullpen ERA. Washington, Padres, and the Giants are kind of in the middle there. And the Mets, I don't believe in as a whole, even though they have a better bullpen ERA than you. I think this could be the thing that separates the St. Louis Cardinals from the rest of this National League wild card race.
Well, they got an opportunity to keep the foot on the pedal tonight when they take on the Marlins, the first of 3 on this road trip. Now's your chance to win a pair of tickets to see Green Day and Rancid on August 15th at Hollywood Casino Amphitheater. Just text in right now to our Air Comfort Service text line 314-399-9646. And if you can tell us, we talked about this in the juncture, a Carnival ride was suspended upside down. How long was that ride upside down before they got it fixed? You text us that, your texter 101, and you get your tickets to see Green Day and Rancid. You can find all the ticket details and bonus chance to score free tickets to Green Day and Rancid at 101ESPN.com or on the 101 mobile app. The Rewind is next here on 101 ESPN. Closing it down here with the Rewind, along with Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis. I'm Alex Ferrario, as we'll close it down the way we opened this after winning 2 of 3 for the Cardinals against the Cubs. They've now pushed themselves into the second wild card spot, a half game up on the Padres. But more importantly, T-Bone, this is the separation that we talked about from the pack. You're now 2 games up on the Chicago Cubs of that second wild card spot. After you took down the Pirates, you're 1.5 games up on them. Now you've got an opportunity to continue that push. And from now until that All-Star break is when you really can separate from the pack. I think that is going to be the area that the Cardinals can exploit and go into the All-Star break with the possibility of chasing either that top wild card spot or maybe, if you're aggressive enough and can do enough damage, chasing that top team in the NL Central, the Brewers.
Yeah, I like what we've seen from them. I'm still a little bit on the fence with the Cardinals just because of the middle of the order and Goldy and Arenado, but I can't deny that they're playing really good baseball and they're finding ways to win without those guys hitting. So we'll see if it continues. This is one of those series where, you're not going to learn a lot about the St. Louis Cardinals at the Miami Marlins. It's almost a bad thing if we have to talk about this series.
Absolutely.
Because you should easily take 2 of 3, if not sweep this series from Miami. It's more of a conversation if you lose this series. I don't expect that to happen the way that they've been playing. I think they should take 2 of 3 at minimum from Miami, but they got to continue to play that clean baseball that we've been seeing from them here of late.
They go up against Braxton Garrett tonight, a lefty on the mound, as you'll have Sonny Gray going to start the series off. The lineup is out, which means the Fast Lane will have the lineup game for you. Graham Francis doing a phenomenal job filling in for BK. He will be back with us tomorrow on BK and Ferrario from 11 to 2 right here on your home for the Blues 101 ESPN.